In the shadowed halls of Blackwood Manor, a scream pierces the night Lord Ashford lies dead, stabbed in a locked library, a cryptic letter burned to ash, and a smudge of red clay the only clue. Hercule Poirot, the master detective, unravels. A web of family secrets, betrayal, and revenge. Suspects abound: a debt-ridden son, a secretive daughter-in-law, a silent niece, a scheming butler, and an archaeologist obsessed with a hidden artifact. As bodies pile up and motives twist, Poirot's little grey cells face their greatest challenge. Can he solve the impossible murder before the killer strikes again? Discover Agatha Christie's most shocking plot twist in this gripping tale of deception and truth. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackwood Manor. The autumn wind carried a sharp chill as it swept across the Belgian countryside, rustling the leaves outside Hercule Poirot's modest but impeccably neat apartment in Brussels. The little detective, with his meticulously groomed moustache and polished patent leather shoes, sat in his favourite armchair by the fire, a cup of tisane steaming gently in his hand. His eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the pages of a French novel, though his mind was only half engaged. The quiet of the afternoon was pleasant, but Poirot felt a certain restlessness, a longing for a puzzle to challenge his little grey cells. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed 3, its delicate notes breaking the silence. Poirot glanced up, his brow furrowing slightly. He had no appointments today, no callers expected. Yet the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside his door suggested otherwise. He set down his book and adjusted his tie, ensuring every detail of his appearance was as precise as his thoughts. A moment later, a knock, firm but not impatient, code through the room. "Entrez," Poirot called, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. The door opened to reveal his faithful friend and companion, Captain Arthur Hastings, his face flushed from the cold and his hat slightly askew. In his hand, he clutched a cream-coloured envelope, its edges embossed with an elegant crest. "Poirot, old chap," Hastings exclaimed, stepping inside and shaking off his coat. "You'll never guess what's arrived. A letter addressed to you, and it looks frightfully important." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest as he took the envelope from Hastings. The paper was thick, expensive, and bore the faint scent of lavender. The crest, a stylized lion holding a quill, was unfamiliar to him, but it spoke of wealth and tradition. He turned the envelope over, noting the wax seal, unbroken and stamped with the same lion emblem. With a small, precise movement, he broke the seal and extracted a single sheet of paper, written in a flowing, confident hand. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," he read aloud, his voice carrying the faintest trace of his Belgian accent. "I trust this letter finds you in good health. My name is Lord Reginald Ashford of Blackwood Manor, Sussex, England. I have heard of your remarkable talents as a detective, and I find myself in need of your singular expertise. A matter of grave importance has arisen, one that requires discretion, and intellect of the highest order. I humbly request your presence at Blackwood Manor this coming weekend, where all expenses will be provided for. I cannot divulge more in writing, but I assure you the situation is most urgent. Yours sincerely, Reginald Ashford." Poirot lowered the letter, his fingers tapping thoughtfully against the arm of his chair. "Most curious, Hastings," he murmured. "This Lord Ashford, he does not say what troubles him, yet he speaks of urgency and discretion. What do you make of it?" Hastings, who had settled into a chair opposite Poirot, rubbed his chin. "Sounds like trouble at the old manor, doesn't it? Perhaps a family squabble, or a stolen heirloom." You know how these aristocratic types are always some drama brewing in those big houses. Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. Perhaps, mon ami, but I suspect it is more than a mere squabble. The tone of the letter, it is formal, yet there is a certain restraint. Lord Ashford is a man who chooses his words with care. This is no trivial matter. Are you going to accept, then? Hastings asked, leaning forward eagerly. A trip to England could be just the thing. A bit of country air, a mystery to Salvitz, but a while since we've had a proper case. Poirot tilted his head, considering. His last case, a rather tedious affair involving a stolen necklace in Paris, had left him unsatisfied. The puzzle had been too simple, the culprit too obvious. This invitation, however, held promise. The vagueness of the letter intrigued him, as did the mention of Blackwood Manor, name that stirred a faint memory, though he could not place it. "We, Hastings," he said at last, his voice resolute. "We shall go to Blackwood Manor, the little grey cells. They demand a challenge, and I suspect this Lord Ashford will provide one. Prepare your valise, mon ami. We depart tomorrow." The journey to England was uneventful, save for Hastings. Enthusiastic commentary on the changing landscape as their train rattled through the English countryside. Poirot, ever the meticulous observer, preferred to study his fellow passengers, noting their habits and expressions. The train was crowded, with travellers, businessmen in stiff collars, families with noisy children, and an elderly woman knitting furiously in the corner. None, however, seemed connected to their destination, and Poirot's thoughts returned to the mysterious letter. Blackwood Manor lay in the heart of Sussex, a region of rolling hills and ancient woodlands, as their hired car wound its way along. Narrow lanes, the manor came into view, a sprawling edifice of weathered stone and ivor-clad walls. Its towers rose against the grey sky, and its windows glinted like watchful eyes. The estate was surrounded by meticulously tended gardens, though the air carried a faint sense of neglect, as if the grandeur of the place had begun to fade. "Impressive, isn't it?" Hastings remarked, peering out the window. "Looks like something out of a Gothic novel. I bet there's a ghost or two lurking about." Poirot chuckled softly. "Ghosts, Hastings? None. The mysteries of Blackwood Manor will be of the human variety, I assure you. The living, they are far more dangerous than the dead." The car pulled up to the manor's imposing front doors, where a tall, stooped figure awaited them. The man, dressed in the impeccable black of a butler, bowed as they stepped out. His face was lined, his eyes sharp but weary, and his voice carried a measured formality. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he said, his tone as precise as his posture. "I am Grayson, butler to Lord Ashford. Welcome to Blackwood Manor. His lordship is expecting you." "Mercy, Monsieur Grayson," Poirot replied, studying the butler closely. There was something in the man's demeanour, flicker of unease. Perhaps that piqued Poirot's interest. "We are most grateful for your hospitality." Grayson led them into the manor, through a grand hall adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. The air smelled of polished wood and old books, and the faint creak of the floorboards echoed in the vast space. They were shown to a drawing-room where a fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across velvet drapes and antique furniture. Lord Reginald Ashford stood by the fireplace, a man of perhaps 60, with silver hair and a commanding presence. His eyes, however, were troubled, and his hands fidgeted with a gold pocket watch. Beside him stood a younger man, broad-shouldered and handsome, with a restless energy that contrasted with his father's stillness. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, Lord Ashford said, stepping forward. Thank you for coming on such short notice. This is my son, Charles Ashford. Charles gave a curt nod, his expression guarded. Father's told me about you, he said. Says you're the best detective in Europe. I hope you're as good as he thinks. Poirot inclined his head, unperturbed by the younger man's tone. I trust, Monsieur Charles, that my little grey cells will not disappoint. Now, Lord Ashford, perhaps you will enlighten us as to the nature of this urgent matter. Lord Ashford hesitated, glancing at his son. Not here, he said quietly. We'll discuss it after dinner, when the household is gathered. There are complications, Monsieur Poirot. I trust you understand the need for discretion. Of course, Poirot replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. Discretion is, as you say, most important. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a woman, her elegance marred by a nervous air. She was perhaps in her 30s, with dark hair pinned in an elaborate style and a silk dress that rustled as she moved. My daughter, Eveline Ashford, Lord Ashford introduced. Eveline, this is Monsieur Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings. Eveline's smile was strained, her eyes darting between Poirot and her father-in-law. A pleasure, she murmured, though her voice lacked warmth. I hope your journey was comfortable. Most comfortable, Madame, Poirot said, noting the tension in her posture. And I am most eager to learn more of Blackwood Manor. As the evening approached, more members of the household appeared. Clara, Lord Ashford's orphaned niece, was a quiet young woman with sharp eyes and a reserved manner. Dr. Julian Mortimer, a visiting archaeologist, was a wiry man with an intense gaze, his fingers stained with ink and his conversation peppered with references to ancient artifacts. The staff, including a nervous maid named Lily and a gruff groundskeeper, hovered at the edges, their presence adding to the undercurrent of unease. Dinner was a formal affair, served in a dining room lit by a chandelier that cast flickering shadows. Across the table, the food was exquisite roast, pheasant, glazed vegetables, and a rich claret, but the conversation was stilted. Charles argued with his father about the estate's finances, Evelyn toyed with her food, and Clara spoke little, her eyes fixed on her plate. Dr. Mortimer, however, was animated, regaling the table with tales of his digs in Egypt, though noticed his stories seemed rehearsed, as if designed to deflect attention. Monsieur Poirot, Lord Ashford, said at one point, his voice cutting through the chatter, you must find Blackwood Manor quite different from your usual haunts. It's an old place, full of history and secrets. Secrets, my lord, Poirot replied, his tone light but probing. Every old house has its secrets, Nan, but it is the secrets of the present that interest me most. Lord Ashford's smile was tight. Quite so. We shall speak of those later. As the meal drew to a close, the tension in the room seemed to thicken. Hastings, ever observant of mood if not of detail, leaned toward Poirot and whispered, Something's off, old boy. This lot's jumpier than a cat in a thunderstorm. Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the faces around the table. Patience, Hastings. The little grey cells, they are already at work. The evening took a darker turn when a piercing scream shattered the quiet. The sound came from upstairs, sharp and terrified. The household froze, then erupted into motion. Poirot, calm amidst the chaos, followed Lord Ashford and the others as they rushed toward the source of the cry. They found Lily, the maid, trembling at the top of the grand staircase, her face pale. The library, she gasped. It's his lordship." Poirot's heart quickened, though his expression remained composed. He pushed past the others, his small frame moving with surprising speed, and entered the library. The room was dimly lit, its shelves lined with leather-bound volumes. In the centre, sprawled across a Persian rug, lay Lord Reginald Ashford, a dagger protruding from his chest, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The window was shut, the door had been locked from the inside, and a faint smudge of red clay marred the otherwise pristine floor. Poirot knelt beside the body, his fingers hovering over the dagger without touching it. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "the game, it has begun." The hours that followed were a blur of activity. The local police were summoned, though Poirot insisted on preserving the scene until they arrived. The household gathered in the drawing-room, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and suspicion. Charles paced like a caged animal, Evelyn clutched a handkerchief, Clara sat silently, and Dr. Mortimer muttered about curses and ancient relics. Grayson, the butler, moved with quiet efficiency, offering brandy to steady nerves, though his own hands trembled slightly. Poirot stood by the fireplace, his eyes moving from one face to another. "Mes amis," he said at last, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "we are faced with a tragedy. Lord Ashford is dead, and the circumstances, they are most unusual. The locked room, the dagger, the red claithes, are pieces of a puzzle. And Hercule Poirot, he will solve it. But how?" Charles demanded, his voice sharp. The door was locked, the window barred. No one could have gotten in or out. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "That, Monsieur Charles, is what makes it interesting. The impossible, it is merely a challenge to the little grey cells." As the police arrived and began their preliminary investigation, Poirot retreated to a corner with Hastings, his mind already racing. The letter, the locked room, the red clays, they were clues, fragments of a larger truth. But there was something else, a sense of something hidden, something Lord Ashford had meant to reveal before his life was cut short. "Hastings," Poirot said softly, "this is no ordinary murder. There is a pattern here, a story that waits to be told, and we, mon ami, we shall uncover it." The night stretched on, filled with whispers and shadows, as Blackwood Manor settled into an uneasy silence. For Hercule Poirot, the game was afoot, and the stakes were higher than ever. Chapter 2. The gathering storms. The wind howled through the ancient oaks that lined the long, winding drive to Blackwood Manor, their gnarled branches clawing at the twilight sky. Hercule Poirot, seated beside Captain Hastings in the back of a sleek, black Rolls-Royce, adjusted his perfectly knotted tie and peered out the window with a mixture of curiosity and unease. The manor loomed ahead, its Gothic silhouette stark against the bruised purple of the horizon. Its tall spires and ivy-clad stone walls seemed to whisper secrets, and Poirot's sharp eyes missed none of it. "Rather a grim place, isn't it?" "Poirot," Hastings remarked, his voice tinged with the discomfort of a man more accustomed to the bustle of London than the brooding isolation of the countryside. "I say, this Lord Ashford must be an odd sort to live in such a fortress." "Mon ami," Poirot replied, his Belgian accent crisp and deliberate. "It is not the house that is odd, but the people within it. A man does not invite Hercule Poirot to a remote estate without reason. This matter of utmost importance, it intrigues me. We shall soon see what lies beneath the surface of Blackwood Manor." The car slowed as it approached the manors, imposing iron gates, which creaked open as if reluctant to admit visitors. The driver, a taciturn man with a weathered face, said nothing as he navigated the gravel path to the entrance. Poirot noted the overgrown gardens, their once hedges now wild and tangled, a sign of neglect that contrasted sharply with the grandeur of the manor itself. Hastings, ever the optimist, attempted to lighten the mood. Perhaps it's just a social call, eh? A weekend in the country, good food, fine wine, nothing sinister about that. Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of amusement. Hastings, your optimism is as charming as it is misplaced. An invitation so vague, yet so urgent, does not promise a mere weekend of leisure. No, no, there is something afoot, and Poirot shall uncover it. The car came to a halt before the manor's heavy oak doors, which were flanked by stone gargoyles whose weathered faces seemed to leer at the newcomers. A footman, young and nervous, hurried to open the car door, his movements betraying attention that Poirot's keen senses immediately registered. The man's hands trembled slightly as he took their coats, and his eyes darted toward the shadowed interior of the house. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor. Gentlemen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Lord Ashford is expecting you." Inside, the grand foyer was a study in faded opulence. A massive chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, its crystals dulled by dust, casting a dim, flickering light over marble floors worn smooth by generations. Of footsteps, portraits of stern-faced Ashfords lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow Poirot and Hastings as they were led toward the drawing-room. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood, wax polish, and something less tangible, perhaps the weight of secrets long buried. Lord Reginald Ashford awaited them in the drawing-room, a cavernous space dominated by a roaring fireplace and shelves of leather-bound books. He was a tall, gaunt man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to assess Poirot with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. His tailored suit was impeccable, but the lines etched into his face spoke of a man burdened by more than age. "Monsieur Poirot," Lord Ashford said, extending a hand that was surprisingly firm for its thinness, "I am honored you accepted my invitation. And Captain Hastings, a pleasure. I trust your journey was comfortable." "Most comfortable, thank you," Poirot replied, his tone polite but guarded. "Your invitation, Lord Ashford, it was. Most intriguing. May I inquire as to the nature of this matter of utmost importance?" Lord Ashford's smile was tight, almost forced. "All in good time, Monsieur Poirot. First, allow me to introduce you to the others. We are a small gathering tonight, but I assure you it is a most interesting one." As if on cue, the double doors to the drawing-room opened, and the other guests began to filter in. Poirot's eyes moved methodically from one to another, cataloguing details with the precision of a watchmaker. First came Charles Ashford, Lord Ashford's only son, a man in his early 40s with the polished charm of a seasoned socialite. His dark hair was slicked back, and his smile was wide but did not reach his eyes, which flickered with a restless energy. He carried a glass of brandy, and his gait suggested a man accustomed to command. Yet there was a slight tremor in his hand that Poirot noted. Next was Evelyn Ashford, Charles's wife, a striking woman with auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her emerald gown clung to her slender frame, and her movements were graceful, almost theatrical, but her eyes were shadowed, and her lips pressed into a thin line when she thought no one was watching. She greeted Poirot with a polite nod, but her attention seemed elsewhere, as if she were listening for something beyond the room. Clara Ashford, Lord Ashford's orphaned niece, entered next. She was younger than Poirot had expected, perhaps in her mid-20s, with a delicate beauty marred by a certain fragility. Her blonde hair was loosely pinned, and her pale blue dress seemed chosen more for modesty than fashion. Her eyes, wide and wary, darted between the guests, and she clutched a small book to her chest as if it were a shield. The butler, Mr. Grayson, followed a man whose age was difficult to determine. His posture was rigid, his face impassive, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who had served the Ashford family for decades. Yet there was a subtle tension in his demeanour, as if he were perpetually braced for an unseen blow. Finally, Dr. Leonard Mortimer, a visiting archaeologist, entered with an air of distracted enthusiasm. His tweed suit was rumpled, and his greying hair was dishevelled, as if he had just returned from a dig. He carried a notebook under one arm and greeted Poirot with a hearty handshake, his voice booming with an energy that seemed at odds with the sombre mood of the room. "Dinner will be served shortly," Lord Ashford announced, gesturing toward a set of double doors leading to the dining room. "Shall we?" The dining room was as grand as the rest of the manor, with a long mahogany table set with gleaming silver and crystal. A massive chandelier hung overhead, its light reflecting off the polished surfaces, creating an illusion of warmth that did little to dispel the chill in the air. The guests took their seats, and Poirot, seated to Lord Ashford's right, observed the dynamics with keen interest. The meal began with a cream of asparagus soup, served by silent footmen who moved like shadows. The conversation was stilted at first, limited to pleasantries about the weather and the estate's history. But as the main course, roast pheasant with a rich Madeira sauce, was served, the tension in the room began to surface. "Father," Charles said, his tone light but edged with something sharper, "you've been rather secretive about this gathering. Surely you can tell us why you've summoned us all here, and why Monsieur Poirot, of all people?" Lord Ashford's fork paused midway to his mouth. He set it down carefully, his eyes narrowing. "Charles, you've always been impatient. I have my reasons, and they will be revealed in due course. For now, enjoy the meal." Charles's smile was brittle. "Of course, father, but you must admit it's unusual to invite a detective of Monsieur Poirot's renown for a mere social occasion." Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "It is true, Monsieur Charles, that I am not often invited to dine without purpose, but I am content to wait for Lord Ashford's explanation. The pheasant, it is exquisite, Nan." Evelyn laughed, a brittle sound that drew every eye. "Oh, Charles, do stop prodding. You'll spoil the evening. Isn't it enough that we're all together for once?" "Together," Clara murmured, her voice barely audible. If only it felt that way. The table fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Poirot's gaze flicked to Clara, noting the way her fingers tightened around her fork. There was a story there, he thought, one of resentment or pain. Perhaps both. Dr. Mortimer, seemingly oblivious to the tension, launched into an enthusiastic monologue about his latest archaeological finder, series of Iron Age artifacts discovered in a nearby quarry. "The history of this land is extraordinary," he said, his eyes gleaming. "There are rumours of a lost treasure buried somewhere on the estate, you know, a relic from the time of the Romans, perhaps even older." "Treasure," Hastings said, his interest piqued. "That sounds like something out of a novel." "Hardly," Charles snapped, his tone sharper than necessary. "The estate's been searched for centuries. If there was anything to find, it would have been dug up long ago." "Perhaps," Dr. Mortimer said, undeterred, "but new methods, new technologies ground-penetrating radar, for instance, could reveal what's been missed. I've been exploring the old quarry. You see, enough about your quarry, Evelyn interrupted, her voice tight. This isn't one of your lecture halls, Leonard. Dr. Mortimer blinked, clearly taken aback, but before he could respond, Mr. Grayson stepped forward to clear the plates, his movements precise but hurried. Poirot watched him closely, noting the way his eyes lingered on Lord Ashford, as if waiting for a signal that never came. The conversation limped along through dessert, delicate lemon tart that Poirot savoured with appreciation, but the undercurrents of tension grew stronger. Charles and Evelyn exchanged barbed remarks about the estate's finances, with Charles hinting at debts that needed settling. Clara remained silent, her eyes fixed on her plate, while Dr. Mortimer attempted to steer the conversation back to his artifacts, only to be met with polite indifference. Lord Ashford, for his part, seemed content to let the discord play out, his expression inscrutable. As coffee was served, the atmosphere grew heavier, as if the storm outside had seeped into the room. Poirot, ever observant, noted the small details. The way Evelyn's hand trembled as she lifted her cup, the way Clara's eyes darted toward the door, the way Mr. Grayson's posture stiffened when Charles mentioned the estate's declining fortunes. There was a puzzle here, Poirot thought, and the pieces were beginning to take shape. The evening drew to a close, and Lord Ashford rose, his voice cutting through the murmurs. I suggest we retire for the night. Tomorrow I will explain the purpose of this gathering. Until then, rest well. The guests dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the vast halls. Poirot and Hastings were shown to their rooms, a pair of adjoining suites on the second floor. Hastings, loosening his tie, turned to Poirot with a frown. I say, Poirot, there's something rotten here. Did you see the way they were all looking at each other, like a pack of wolves circling a carcass? Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming in the lamplight. Oui, mon ami, there is a storm gathering in this house, and it is not the one outside. The little grey cells, they are already at work. There is much to uncover, and I suspect the truth will not be pleasant. Hastings opened his mouth to reply, but before he could speak, a piercing scream shattered the silence of the manor. It came from somewhere below, sharp and filled with terror, echoing through the stone corridors like a gunshot. Poirot's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. V.T. Hastings, he said, already moving toward the door. The storm, it has begun. The two men hurried down the grand staircase, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. The scream had come from the direction of the library, a room they had passed earlier, its heavy doors now slightly ajar. As they approached, Poirot's sharp senses caught the faint scent of something metallic, blood, perhaps, and the distant sound of footsteps retreating into the night. The library was dark, save for the flickering light of a single candelabrum on a side table. The heavy curtains were drawn, and the air was thick with the musty scent of old books. Poirot's eyes swept the room, taking in the details, the towering bookshelves, the ornate desk, the Persian rug underfoot, and there, slumped in a high-backed chair, was Lord Ashford, his eyes wide and unseeing, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Hastings, Poirot said, his voice low and urgent, fetch the others. We have a murder on our hands. As Hastings rushed to obey, Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved fingers carefully examining the scene. The wound was precise, a single stab to the heart, delivered with force. An antique dagger lay on the floor nearby, its blade stained with blood. The room was locked from the inside, the key still in the door, and the windows were shut tight, their latches undisturbed. Yet something caught Poirot's eye, a smudge of red clay on the floor, vivid against the polished wood. The little grey cells were indeed at work, and Hercule Poirot knew that the gathering storm had broken, revealing a darkness that would test even his formidable intellect. Chapter 3. The body in the library. The clock in Blackwood Manor's grand hall struck midnight, its sombre chime reverberating through the stone corridors like a warning. Hercule Poirot, roused from his thoughts, adjusted his perfectly knotted tie and glanced at Captain Hastings, who stood beside him, his face pale under the flickering light of a chandelier. The scream that had pierced the silence moments earlier still lingered in their minds, a jagged note of terror that had come from the direction of the library. Without a word, Poirot led the way, his polished shoes clicking against the polished oak floor, Hastings trailing close behind. The manor was a labyrinth of shadows, its walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced Ashfords, whose eyes seemed to follow the pair as they moved. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax polish, mingled with something less tangible, a tension that had been building since their arrival at the estate earlier that day. Lord Reginald Ashford's invitation had been cryptic, hinting at a matter requiring Poirot's unique talents, but it had offered no specifics. Now, as they approached the library door, Poirot's mind was already at work, cataloguing every detail of the evening, the strained dinner conversation, the guarded glances, the undercurrents of resentment among the household. The library door was ajar, a sliver of golden light spilling into the darkened hallway. Poirot paused, his hand hovering over the brass handle. "Hastings, mon ami," he said softly, his Belgian accent crisp, "prepare yourself. What lies beyond this door may not be pleasant." Hastings nodded, though his jaw tightened, betraying his unease. With a gentle push, Poirot opened the door, and the scene within confirmed his instincts. Lord Reginald Ashford lay sprawled across the Persian rug in the centre of the room, his lifeless eyes staring at the ornate ceiling. A pool of blood had seeped into the intricate patterns of the rug, dark and glistening under the glow of a single table lamp. An antique dagger, its hilt encrusted with emeralds, protruded from his chest, the blade buried deep. The room was otherwise undisturbed, its shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, a fire smouldering in the grate, and a heavy oak desk cluttered with papers. But what struck Poirot immediately was the doors locked and gauged from the inside, with no visible key in sight. "Good heavens, Poirot!" Hastings exclaimed, his voice a mix of shock and horror. "He's been murdered, but how?" "The door was locked when we arrived." Poirot raised a hand, silencing his friend. "Calm yourself, Hastings. The locked door is but one piece of the puzzle. We must observe, we must think, and we must not leap to conclusions." He stepped forward, his movements deliberate, his eyes scanning the room with the precision of a watchmaker. He knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene, and examined Lord Ashford's face. The man's expression was frozen in a grimace of surprise, as though death had caught him unawares. His hands, still warm, clutched at the dagger, suggesting he had tried, in his final moments, to pull it free. Poirot's gaze moved to the dagger itself. It was an exquisite piece, likely from the manor's collection of artifacts displayed in the drawing-room. Its blade was sharp, the blood on it fresh, indicating the murder had occurred mere minutes before the scream. Poirot noted the absence of defensive wounds on Lord Ashford's hands, curious, for a man of his vigour would surely have fought back. He stood, his moustache twitching slightly as he processed the details. "Hastings," he said, turning to his friend, "fetch the household. We must ensure no one leaves the manor, and I wish to speak with them all. But first, observe the room. Tell me what you see." Hastings, still shaken, forced himself to focus. "Well, the door was locked, as I said. The windows are shut, and the curtains drawn. The fire's dying, but it's still warm, so it hasn't been long. There's a glass of brandy on the desk, half drunk, and some papers scattered about. And there's a strange mark on the floor, near the body. It looks like red clay." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Very good, Hastings. The red clay is most interesting, is it not? In a manner so meticulously kept, such a mark is out of place. We shall return to it." He moved to the desk, his gloved hands carefully lifting the papers. Most were mundane estate accounts, letters of correspondence, but one item caught his attention: a small, singed fragment of paper in the fireplace, its edges blackened but a few words still legible. Poirot retrieved it with a pair of tongs, holding it to the light. The words "family secret" and "debt" stood out, written in a hurried hand. A letter, perhaps. Hastings ventured, peering over Poirot's shoulder, burned to hide something. "Perhaps," Poirot murmured, placing the fragment in a small envelope he produced from his pocket. "But why burn it only partially, and why leave it where it might be found? Nan, Hastings, this is not carelessness. This is a clue left for us to discover or to mislead us." The sound of footsteps interrupted them as the household began to gather outside the library. Charles Ashford, Lord Reginald's son, was the first to arrive, his face flushed from either haste or drink. "What's happened?" he demanded, pushing past Hastings to peer inside. His eyes widened at the sight of his father's body, and he staggered back, clutching the doorframe. "Good God, father!" "Remain calm, Monsieur Charles," Poirot said, his voice steady but commanding. "No one is to enter this room until I have completed my examination. Please, wait in the drawing room with the others." Charles nodded, his expression a mix of shock and something less readable: anger, perhaps, or fear. As he retreated, Evelyn Ashford, Charles's wife, appeared, her silk dressing gown clutched tightly around her. Her pale face and wide eyes suggested genuine distress, but Poirot noted the way her hands trembled, as though she were holding back more than grief. Clara, the orphaned niece, followed, her expression unreadable, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Mr. Grayson, the butler, stood at the back, his face impassive but his eyes darting nervously. Dr. Mortimer, the archaeologist, was the last to arrive, his tweed jacket rumpled as though he'd dressed in haste. "Mon Dieu," Poirot muttered to himself, observing the group. A cast of characters, each with their own secrets, no doubt. He turned back to the room, his mind racing. The locked door, the red clay, the burned letter, these were the threads of the mystery, and he would weave them together with the precision of his little grey cells. He began a meticulous examination of the room, starting with the windows. They were indeed shut, their latches secure, and the heavy velvet curtains undisturbed. The walls, lined with books, showed no signs of hidden passages, though Poirot tapped several panels to be certain. The fireplace, still warm, held only the singed fragment he'd already found, but the ashes suggested a larger document had been burned. He turned his attention to the desk, where the brandy glass caught his eye. A faint smudge on its rim suggested someone had drunk from it besides Lord Ashford, someone careless enough to leave a trace. Hastings, Poirot called, "Assist me with the floor. This red clay, where does it come from? It is not native to the manor's polished surfaces." Hastings knelt beside the smudge, a faint streak near the body. "It's fresh," he said, rubbing a bit between his fingers. "Not ground into the rug, just sitting on top. Could it have been tracked in by the killer?" "Possibly," Poirot replied, his eyes narrowing. "But consider, Hastings, if the door was locked from the inside, how did the killer enter or leave? And why this clay in this precise spot?" He paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind turning over the possibilities. The clay suggested an outdoor origin, perhaps the estate's grounds, but its presence in a locked room was perplexing. As the household waited in the drawing room, Poirot continued his inspection. He examined the dagger more closely, noting its weight and balance. It was a ceremonial piece, not a practical weapon, yet its blade was razor-sharp. The emeralds on the hilt gleamed, catching the lamplight, and Poirot wondered if its value was more than decorative. Had it been chosen for its symbolism, or simply because it was at hand? The sound of raised voices from the drawing room interrupted his thoughts. Charles was arguing with Evelyn, their words muffled but heated. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. "The household is restless," he said. "We must move quickly before they begin to obscure the truth." He returned to the body, checking Lord Ashford's pockets. A gold pocket watch, a few coins, and a folded handkerchief. Nothing unusual. But the absence of a key to the library door was significant. If the door was locked from the inside, where was the key? Poirot searched the room again, checking under the rug, behind the desk, even inside the books nearest the body. "Nothing, Hastings," he said, his voice low. "This is no ordinary murder. The locked room, the missing key, the red clay, these are deliberate. Someone wishes to challenge Hercule Poirot, to test the little grey cells. But they will find that I am not so easily outwitted." The next hour was spent cataloguing every detail of the scene. Poirot sketched the room in a small notebook, marking the position of the body, the dagger, the clay smudge, and the desk. He noted the angle of the blood pool, which suggested Lord Ashford had fallen backward after being stabbed. The lack of footprints in the blood ruled out the killer standing close at the moment of death. Yet the dagger's angle suggested a direct, forceful blow. A contradiction, perhaps, or a clue. As dawn began to break, casting pale light through the curtains, Poirot stepped back. Satisfied with his initial observations, the household was still gathered in the drawing room, their voices now subdued, their faces drawn with exhaustion and suspicion. Poirot knew that among them was the killer, hiding behind a mask of grief or innocence. But he also knew that no mask could withstand the scrutiny of his mind. "Hastings," he said, closing his notebook, "we shall now speak with the household. Each will tell their story, and each will reveal, perhaps unwittingly, a piece of the truth. The body in the library is but the beginning. The real mystery lies in the hearts of those who live in Blackwood Manor." They left the library, the door still locked behind them, and made their way to the drawing room. The air was thick with tension, the household seated in a semicircle, their eyes fixed on Poirot as he entered. Charles sat with his arms crossed. Evelyn clutched a handkerchief. Clara stared at the floor. Mr. Grayson stood stiffly by the door, and Dr. Mortimer fidgeted with his glasses. Each, Poirot knew, held a piece of the puzzle and a secret they would rather keep hidden. "Monsieur, Madame," Poirot began, his voice calm but authoritative, "a great tragedy has occurred. Lord Ashford is dead, murdered in a room locked from within. I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover the truth, but I require your cooperation. Each of you will tell me where you were this night, what you saw, what you heard. And mark my words, the truth will not remain hidden for long. The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fire in the drawing-room grate. Poirot's eyes moved from face to face, reading their expressions, their postures, their silences. The game had begun, and he was ready to play. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Blackwood Manor, casting long shadows across the drawing-room where the household awaited Poirot's questions. The air was thick with unease, each person shifting uncomfortably under the weight of suspicion. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small, neat figure commanding attention despite his unassuming stature. Hastings stood by the fireplace, his notebook open, ready to record every word. Poirot began with Charles Ashford, whose flushed face and dishevelled hair suggested a man struggling to maintain control. "Monsieur Charles," Poirot said, his tone polite but firm, "where were you when the scream was heard?" Charles cleared his throat, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "I was in my room, upstairs. I'd retired early after dinner too much. Wine, perhaps. I heard the scream and came down at once." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you saw no one in the corridor? Heard nothing unusual before the scream?" "Nothing," Charles said quickly, too quickly. "It was quiet until that awful sound." Poirot nodded, making a mental note of the hesitation in Charles's voice. He turned to Evelyn, whose delicate features were marred by dark circles under her eyes. "Madame Ashford, your account." "If you please." Evelyn's voice was soft, almost a whisper. I was sleepwalking. It happens sometimes when I'm anxious. I woke in the hallway near the library just after the scream. I don't remember how I got there." "Sleepwalking," Poirot repeated, his tone neutral but his mind alert. "Most curious. And you saw nothing, heard nothing, before you woke?" Evelyn shook her head, her eyes darting to Charles, who avoided her gaze. Poirot filed this away, sensing a rift between the couple. He moved on to Clara, the niece, whose quiet demeanour belied a sharp intelligence he had noticed at dinner. "Mademoiselle?" "Clara," he said, "what is your story?" Clara lifted her eyes, her voice steady. "I was in my room, reading. I heard the scream and came downstairs. That's all." Poirot tilted his head, studying her. "Reading at such a late hour, a most dedicated reader, Nan. What book, make?" I asked. Clara hesitated, then said, "A novel, Jane Eyre." Poirot smiled faintly. "A fine choice. And you saw no one, heard nothing, before the scream?" "No," Clara said, her gaze unwavering. But Poirot noted the slight tightening of her hands, a sign of tension she could not fully conceal. Mr. Grayson was next, his posture rigid, his voice measured. "I was in the servants' quarters, sir, preparing for the morning duties. The scream brought me to the hall where I met you and Captain Hastings." Poirot nodded, his eyes lingering on the butler's polished shoes. No trace of red clay, he noted, but that meant little at this stage. Finally, he turned to Dr. Mortimer, whose nervous fidgeting had not gone unnoticed. "Dr. Poirot said, your whereabouts?" Dr. Mortimer adjusted his glasses, his voice slightly unsteady. "I was in my room, studying some notes on the artifacts in Lord Ashford's collection. I came down when I heard the scream." "Artifacts," Poirot repeated, his interest piqued. "You are an archaeologist. Were you perhaps studying something specific to the estate?" Dr. Mortimer hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I was. Researching the history of the Manor's collection, but nothing more. Poirot's moustache twitched. We shall see, Doctor. We shall see. With the initial statements gathered, Poirot dismissed the household, instructing them to remain in the Manor until further notice. He and Hastings returned to the library, where the bodies still lay, now covered with a sheet brought by the housekeeper. The police had been summoned, but they would not arrive for some time, given the Manor's remote location. Poirot used the interim to deepen his investigation. He returned to the red clay smudge, kneeling to examine it more closely. It was indeed fresh, its texture distinct from the Manor's polished surfaces. He scraped a small sample into another envelope, intending to compare it to the estate's grounds later. The burned letter fragment, too, demanded further scrutiny. He examined the fireplace again, sifting through the ashes with a poker. A few more fragments emerged, but none as legible as the first. Still, the words family secret and debt gnawed at him. Was this a financial debt, or something more personal? Hastings, Poirot said, standing, consider the locked room. A classic conundrum, Nan. The door is locked, the windows secure, yet a man is dead, and the killer is gone. How is this possible? Hastings frowned, rubbing his chin. A secret passage, perhaps. These old houses are full of them. Poirot shook his head. Nan, mon ami, I have checked the walls, the floor. There is no passage here, but there is something else, something we have not yet seen. He paced the room again, his eyes darting to the window frame. He paused, running his fingers along the wood, and felt a slight irregularity, hidden catch, cleverly concealed. With a gentle press, a small panel slid open, revealing a mechanism that could lock or unlock the window from the outside. Poirot exclaimed, his voice triumphant. The locked room is not so locked after all. This mechanism allows the window to be secured from without, creating the illusion of an impossible crime. Hastings's eyes widened. So the killer entered through the window, stabbed Lord Ashford, and left the same way, locking it behind them. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone cautious, but we must not assume too much. The mechanism is clever, but it requires knowledge of the Manor's secrets. This points to someone familiar with Blackwood Manor, someone who knows its hidden places. The discovery of the window mechanism shifted Poirot's perspective. The red clay, the burned letter, the dagger all were pieces of a larger puzzle, but the locked room had been the killer's boldest stroke, designed to confound. Yet Poirot was not confounded. His mind was alive with possibilities, each clue a thread to be woven into the tapestry of truth. As the morning wore on, Poirot and Hastings ventured outside to inspect the grounds beneath the library window. The grass was damp from an earlier rain, and Poirot's sharp eyes caught a faint impression in the soil, a partial footprint, smeared with red clay. It matched the smudge in the library, confirming his suspicion that the clay had been tracked in from outside. But where, on the estate, could such clay be found? Hastings, Poirot said, we must visit the groundskeeper. He will know the land better than anyone. This clay is our guide, and it will lead us closer to the truth. They found the groundskeeper, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson, in a small cottage near the stables. His weathered face creased with worry as Poirot explained the situation. Red clay, you say? Thompson said, scratching his head. There's a quarry on the estate, about a mile off. It's got clay like that, reddish and sticky. Ain't been used in years, though. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A quarry, you say? Most interesting. And has anyone been seen near it recently? Thompson hesitated, then nodded. Saw a man there yesterday, poking about. Didn't get a good look, but he wasn't one of the staff. Had a coat and hat, like a gentleman. Poirot thanked the groundskeeper and led Hastings back to the manor, his mind racing. The quarry, the red clay, the mysterious stranger, these were not coincidences. Someone had been to the quarry, tracked the clay into the library, and staged a locked room to cover their tracks. But who and why? Back in the manor, Poirot gathered the household once more, this time in the dining room. The tension was palpable, each person eyeing the others with suspicion. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding. "Silence. Mies, Amos," he said. "We have made progress." The library was not as secure as it seemed. A mechanism in the window allowed entry and exit, and a trace of red clay suggests the killer walked the grounds. "I ask you now, has anyone visited the old quarry on the estate?" The room was silent, but Poirot's eyes caught Dr. Mortimer's slight flinch. "Doctor," he said, turning to the archaeologist, "you are a man of the earth, are you not? Have you, perhaps, explored this quarry?" Dr. Mortimer's face paled. I did visit it, yes. For my research. The quarry has historical significance, possibly tied to the manor's artifacts. But I swear, I had nothing to do with Lord Ashford's death." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "We shall see, Doctor, we shall see," as the household dispersed. Poirot turned to Hastings, a faint smile playing on his lips. "The quarry, the clay, the letter, these are the keys, Hastings. But the lock is in the hearts of this household. We must dig deeper, and soon the truth will surface." The day stretched on, with Poirot interviewing each member of the household again, probing their stories for inconsistencies. Charles's alibi of being in his room was weakened by a maid who claimed to have seen him in the hallway earlier that evening. Evelyn's sleepwalking story was questioned when Poirot found her medication bottle in her room. Its contents diluted a fact. She seemed unaware of Clara's claim of reading was plausible, but her choice of Jane Eyre seemed oddly specific, as though prepared in advance. Mr. Grayson's account held, but his knowledge of the manor's layout made him a candidate for the window mechanism, and Dr. Mortimer's interest in the quarry raised questions about his true motives. By evening, Poirot had gathered enough to form a hypothesis, but he needed more. He returned to the library, now cordoned off by the police, who had arrived and taken photographs of the scene. The body had been removed, but the dagger remained, bagged as evidence. Poirot studied it again, noting a faint scratch on the hilt, as though it had been pried from its display case with force. "Hastings," he said, "this dagger was not chosen at random. It is a symbol, perhaps, of betrayal. And the red clayet is not merely a clue, but a message. The killer wishes us to look outward, to the quarry, to a stranger. But I, Hercule Poirot, look inward, to the heart of this manor." As night fell, Poirot sat in his room, his notebook open, his mind piecing together the fragments. The burned letter, the red clay, the locked room. The dagger each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete. He knew the killer was close, hiding among the household. Their motive tied to the cryptic words of the burned letter, family secret and debt. The next morning Poirot planned to visit the quarry himself, to see what secrets it held. But for now, he closed his notebook and leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed, his little grey cells working tirelessly. The body in the library was only the beginning. The truth, he knew, was waiting to be uncovered, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until it was. As the day wore on, Poirot and Hastings retreated to the library to review their notes. The room was still cordoned off, the chalk outline of Lord Ashford's body a grim reminder of the task at hand. Hastings sat at a desk, flipping through his notebook. They all have motives, Poirot. Charles needs money, Evelyn's hiding something, Clara's got resentment, Grayson's too perfect, and Mortimer's obsessed with that quarry. But none of them seem like killers. Poirot stood by the window, gazing out at the manicured gardens. The heart of a killer, Hastings, is not always obvious. It is the little things, the glance, the hesitation, the detail overlooked that reveal the truth. We must look deeper. He turned to the fireplace, where the fragments of the burned letter had been found. Kneeling, he sifted through the ashes with a gloved hand, his eyes narrowing. This letter, it is the key. A family secret, a debt to be paid. Who would burn such a thing, and why? Hastings frowned. Could it be a will? Maybe someone wanted to destroy it to secure their inheritance. Poirot shook his head. Nan, it is not so simple. A will is a document of law, not burned in haste. This was personal, urgent. Someone feared its contents being known. The afternoon brought a new development. A groundskeeper, a wiry man named Jenkins, approached Poirot as he and Hastings walked the estate's perimeter. "Begging your pardon, sir," Jenkins said, twisting his cap in his hands. "I didn't want to say nothing in front of the others, but I saw someone last night. A stranger near the east gate, cloaked, moving quick. Couldn't see their face." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A stranger, you say? At what hour?" "About 11, sir, just before the scream." "Mercy, Monsieur Jenkins. This is most illuminating." As Jenkins shuffled away, Hastings turned to Poirot. "A stranger, that changes everything. Maybe it's not one of the household at all." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Or perhaps, Hastings, it is someone who wishes us to believe it is a stranger." The game, it becomes more complex. The day stretched into evening, and Poirot continued his interrogations, now focusing on the possibility of an outsider. Charles seized on the groundskeeper's story, insisting it proved his innocence. "You see, some vagrant or thief must have broken in. My father had enemies' business, rivals perhaps." Evelyn, however, grew pale at the mention of a stranger. I didn't see anyone," she stammered. "But if someone was lurking, maybe that's why I was so restless last night." Clara's reaction was subtler. She listened quietly, her eyes fixed on Poirot, as if trying to gauge his thoughts. Mr. Grayson offered nothing new, repeating his alibi with the same calm precision. Dr. Mortimer, however, grew agitated when Poirot pressed him about the quarry. "I told you I wasn't there," he snapped, his voice rising. "Why do you keep harping on that clay?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Because, Monsieur Mortimer, the clay is a clue. It does not belong in the library, yet there it was, beneath the body of Lord Ashford. You, with your knowledge of the quarry, must know its significance." Mortimer's face flushed. "I study artifacts, not dirt. I can't help you with that." As night fell, Poirot and Hastings sat in their guest quarters, the manor's silence pressing in around them. Hastings rubbed his temples. "I don't know, Poirot. They're all hiding something, but I can't see the pattern, the stranger. The clay, the letter, it's a mess." Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. A mess, but a mess with order beneath it. The mind of Hercule Poirot, it sees the threads, even if they are tangled. We must pull them gently, Hastings, until the truth unravels. Over the next few days, Poirot's investigation intensified. He revisited each suspect, pressing for details, watching their reactions. Charles's bluster began to crack, revealing a man desperate to maintain his lifestyle. Evelyn's sleepwalking story faltered when Poirot discovered her tonic bottle was nearly empty. Despite being refilled recently, Clara admitted to overhearing arguments between Charles and Lord Ashford about money, though she insisted she'd kept her distance. Mr. Grayson remained a model of propriety, but Poirot noted his reluctance to discuss his past. Dr. Mortimer, meanwhile, grew increasingly erratic, his scholarly composure giving way to nervous tics. Poirot also explored the manor's layout, mapping its corridors and hidden passages. He found a servant's staircase near the library, concealed behind a panel, which could have allowed someone to slip in and out unnoticed. The window frame, he confirmed, had a subtle mechanism, a latch that could be rigged to lock from the outside, creating the illusion of a sealed room. This discovery narrowed his focus to those who knew the manor's secrets by the 5th day. Poirot had gathered enough to form a hypothesis, though he kept it to himself. He and Hastings sat in the drawing room, the suspects once again assembled. The atmosphere was electric, each person eyeing the others with suspicion. Poirot stood, his presence commanding silence. "Ms. Amos," he said, his voice steady, "the pieces of this puzzle, they begin to fit. The locked room, the dagger, the clay, the letter all point to a truth that lies within this house. One of you knows more than you have said. One of you has woven a web of lies. And Hercule Poirot, he will find you." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. Charles's jaw clenched, Evelyn's hands trembled, Clara's eyes narrowed. Grayson's posture stiffened, and Mortimer's spectacles slipped down his nose. The game, as Poirot had called it, was far from over. The investigation continued, with Poirot meticulously dissecting each suspect's story. He spent hours in the library, examining the crime scene anew. The red clay smudge, he realized, was not just a clue, but a misdirection. Someone had deliberately placed it to point suspicion elsewhere. The burned letter fragments, painstakingly pieced together, revealed only fragments of words. Secret, debt, betrayed. It was enough to confirm Poirot. Is suspicion, Gloria suspicion, a family secret? Something worth killing for? Charles's temper flared during one interview. "You're wasting time, Poirot. My father's enemies were legion. Look outside this house, not at us." But Poirot noted the sweat on his brow, the way his hands shook. Evelyn's sleepwalking alibi was probed further. Poirot asked to see her tonic, and she hesitated, claiming it was private. When he pressed, she admitted to feeling foggy at night, but Poirot suspected tampering, a theory he kept to himself for now. Clara's story held, but her guarded demeanor intrigued Poirot. She spoke of her uncle with a mix of respect and resentment, hinting at a controlling relationship. "He treated me like a child," she said once, her voice tight. "But I didn't hate him." Mr. Grayson's past was a blank slate, which Poirot found suspicious. "A man of your loyalty, Monsieur Grayson, surely you know the manor's secrets." Grayson's reply was curt. "I serve, sir. I don't pry." Dr. Mortimer's obsession with the quarry raised red flags. Poirot found a notebook in his room, filled with sketches of artifacts and maps of the estate. research, Mortimer insisted, but his nervous laughter betrayed him. The groundskeeper's story of a stranger lingered in Poirot's mind. He inspected the east gate, finding no signs of forced entry. The stranger could be a fabrication or someone disguised. He questioned Jenkins again, who described a tall figure in a cloak details that could match anyone in the household. Poirot's nightly reflections with Hastings revealed his method. The mind, Hastings, it plays tricks. The guilty hide in plain sight, using truth to mask lies. We must watch their eyes, their hands, their words. By the seventh day, Poirot was close to a breakthrough. He noticed Evelyn's tonic bottle was tampered with, the seal broken. Clara's book, found in her room, was marked with a page about betrayal coincidence. Charles's debts were confirmed by a letter from a creditor found in his desk. Grayson's impeccable service record hid a gap of several years. Mortimer's quarry map was too precise for mere research. Poirot staged a final gathering, dropping hints about the letter's contents. Charles accused Clara of lying. Clara accused Charles of greed. Evelyn wept. Grayson stood silent, and Mortimer fidgeted. Poirot watched, his little grey cells at work, piecing together the final threads of the mystery. The chapter ends with Poirot's resolve unshaken. The suspects' alibis were cracking, and the truth was within reach. Blackwood Manors. Secrets would not remain hidden for long. Chapter 4. The suspects assembled the morning after Lord Ashford's murder. Blackwood Manor was cloaked in a heavy silence, broken only by the distant ticking of the grand clock in the hall. The air was thick with suspicion, and the household moved with the cautious deliberation of those who knew they were being watched. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the grim circumstances, stood in the drawing-room, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of the assembled occupants. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, hovered nearby, his notebook open and his pen poised. Though his expression betrayed a mix of unease and curiosity, the room was a study in contrasts. Opulent furnishings clashed with the palpable tension among its occupants. The velvet drapes, heavy and crimson, framed tall windows that let in a weak, grey light, casting long shadows across the polished oak floor. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it did little to warm the chill of distrust that hung over the group. Poirot had requested everyone's presence, and they had gathered, albeit reluctantly. Charles Ashford, the late Lord Ashford's ambitious son; Evelyn Ashford, his secretive daughter-in-law; Clara, the orphaned niece with a quiet intensity; Mr. Grayson, the stoic butler; and Dr. Mortimer, the visiting archaeologist whose scholarly demeanour seemed at odds with the nervous twitch in his hands. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small, neat figure commanding attention despite his unassuming stature. His moustache, perfectly waxed, gleamed under the chandelier's light, and his hands were clasped behind his back, a gesture that suggested both patience and authority. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice smooth and precise, "we are faced with a tragedy most grave. Lord Reginald Ashford is dead, murdered in his own library, locked from within. The question before us is simple. Who among you is responsible?" A murmur rippled through the group. Charles, leaning against a bookcase, crossed his arms and scoffed. "This is absurd. You're accusing one of us without evidence." His voice was sharp, but there was a tremor in it, betraying his unease. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of polished charm that came from years of navigating high society. Yet his eyes darted to the others, as if assessing their reactions. Dud Evelyn, seated on a chaise longue, clutched a handkerchief, her pale face framed by a cascade of dark curls. "I was sleepwalking," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't have done it. I wasn't even myself last night." Her eyes flicked to Poirot, then away, as if she feared his scrutiny. Clara, standing near the window, turned to face the room. Her plain dress and tightly pinned hair gave her an air of restraint, but her gaze was fierce. "I was in my room, reading," she said firmly. "I heard the scream, but I didn't leave until morning. I had no reason to harm my uncle, Mr. Grayson, standing near the door with the rigid posture of a man accustomed to service, nodded solemnly. "I was in the servants' quarters, sir. The staff can confirm I was there all evening." His voice was steady, but his hands, clasped in front of him, tightened slightly. Dr. Mortimer, adjusting his spectacles, cleared his throat. "I was in my room, studying artifacts from the quarry. Ancient relics, you see, quite fascinating. I had no cause to be near the library." His words were clipped, and he avoided Poirot's gaze, focusing instead on a spot on the carpet. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his head tilting slightly as he absorbed their statements. "Merci," he said, his tone polite but laced with skepticism. "Each of you claims innocence, yet someone in this house has committed a crime most foul. The alibis, they are weak, none. Let us examine them closely, for the truth, it hides in the details." Hastings, scribbling in his notebook, leaned toward Poirot and whispered, "They all seem plausible, don't they? I mean, nobody's story contradicts the others outright." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Monsieur Hastings, plausibility is the cloak of the guilty. A good alibi is not one that cannot be broken, but one that is difficult to disprove. We shall see who has woven their cloak with care." He turned to Charles first, his gaze piercing. "Monsieur Charles, you say you were in your room, yet the library is but a short walk from your quarters. Did you hear nothing? No footsteps, no voices, before the scream?" Charles shifted, his jaw tightening. "It's a big house, Mr. Poirot. Sound doesn't carry as well as you'd think. I was asleep, or trying to be. I've been under a lot of strain lately. Business matters, you understand." His tone was dismissive, but his fingers tapped nervously against his arm. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Business matters, and the financial strain of your father's estate. Perhaps it weighs heavily. A man in debt might see opportunity in a tragedy." Charles's face reddened. "Are you implying I'd kill my own father for money? That's preposterous." He stepped forward, his fists clenched, but Evelyn reached out, touching his arm. "Charles, please," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Mr. Poirot is only doing his job." Poirot's attention shifted to Evelyn. "Madame Ashford, your sleepwalking is most curious. A condition that places you wandering the halls at night, yet you recall nothing. Tell me, do you take medication for this affliction?" Evelyn's eyes widened slightly, and she hesitated. "Yes, I take a tonic. It helps me rest. But last night I must have wandered. I found myself in the East Wing when I woke." "Most interesting," Poirot said, stroking his moustache. "And this tonic, it is prescribed, stored where others might access it." Evelyn's hands twisted the handkerchief. "In my room, on the bedside table. Why do you ask?" Poirot did not answer directly, but turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle Clara, you were reading. You say a book of what nature? And at what time did you retire?" Clara met his gaze without flinching. A novel, Jane Austen? I don't recall the exact time, but it was late. I heard the scream around midnight, I think. I stayed in my room. Uncle Reginald and I. We weren't close, but I wouldn't hurt him. Poirot's eyes softened, but only for a moment. A young woman, alone in a house of secrets. Perhaps. You overheard something, Nan. A conversation, a plan. Clara shook her head. Nothing. I keep to myself. Poirot moved on to Mr. Grayson. Monsieur Grayson, the butler who sees all and says little. The servants' quarters are far from the library, yet you are a man of duty. Did you not patrol the house, as is your custom? Grayson's expression remained impassive. Not last night, sir. I was attending to the staff. We had a late delivery of supplies, and I was overseeing it. The others can vouch for me. Indeed, Poirot said, his tone neutral. And you, Dr. Mortimer, he continued, turning to the archaeologist, you study artifacts, yet you were in your room, not the quarry. A man of your passion, surely you were tempted to explore by moonlight. Dr. Mortimer's hands twitched, and he adjusted his spectacles again. The quarry is dangerous at night. I was cataloguing my findings. I had no reason to go near the library. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. A locked room, a dagger, a scream in the night, and yet all of you were elsewhere, innocent as lambs. But the truth, Mies Amos, it is not so tidy. Someone has lied, and Poirot will find them. The interviews continued for hours, with Poirot circling back to each suspect, probing inconsistencies. Charles grew increasingly defensive, insisting his debts were manageable and that he had no need to kill his father. Evelyn's story wavered slightly when pressed about her sleepwalking episodes. She admitted they were rare but refused to elaborate on her medication. Clara remained steadfast, though Poirot noted the way her fingers tightened around her book when he mentioned her uncle's control over her inheritance. Mr. Grayson was unflappable, his answers precise, but offering little beyond the bare facts. Dr. Mortimer, however, grew flustered when Poirot asked about the red clay smudge in the library, stammering that he hadn't been near the quarry in days. Chapter 5. The Missing Letter, the morning after the grim discovery in the library. Blackwood Manor seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with unspoken suspicions, and the household moved with the cautious precision of those who knew they were being watched. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed, despite the early hour, sat in the drawing room, his small, precise hands folded over his walking stick. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the faces of the assembled household as they entered one by one, summoned by Captain Hastings at Poirot's request. The tension was palpable, a storm brewing beneath the veneer of civility. Hastings stood by the fireplace, his usually cheerful demeanour subdued. He glanced at Poirot, who gave a slight nod, signalling the start of the morning's inquiry. The household had been shaken by Lord Ashford's murder, and the locked room mystery only deepened their unease. Yet Poirot's focus, as always, was on the details, those small, overlooked fragments that others dismissed but which, to him, were the keys to unlocking the truth. Mies Amos, Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding. We are gathered here to discuss a most unfortunate event. Lord Ashford is dead, and the circumstances are, shall we say, tiers complices. But fear not, Hercule Poirot does not shrink from complexity. The truth, it hides, but it cannot escape the little grey cells. The room was silent. Charles Ashford, the late Lord's son, sat stiffly in an armchair, his jaw tight. His wife, Evelyn, perched beside him, her delicate hands twisting a handkerchief. Clara, the orphaned niece, stood by the window, her face pale but composed. Mr. Grayson, the butler, hovered near the door, his expression unreadable. Dr. Mortimer, the visiting archaeologist, leaned against a bookcase, his fingers drumming lightly on the wood. Each bore the weight of suspicion, and Poirot's gaze lingered on them all. First, Poirot continued, "We must consider the scene of the crime, the library locked from the inside, the dagger, an antique, plunged into the heart of Lord Ashford, and then there is the matter of the letter." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. A letter, partially burned, found in the fireplace. Its contents, they are most curious. A family secret, a debt to be paid. Tell me, who among you knows of this letter? The question landed like a stone in still water. Eyes darted, but no one spoke. Charles cleared his throat, his voice rough. "I don't know anything." "About a letter. Father was always writing things, business, estate matters. Could have been anything, anything." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Nan, Monsieur Charles, not anything. The letter was specific. It spoke of secrets, of debts, and it was burned deliberately to hide its contents. Yet, even in its destruction, it tells us much. Evelyn's handkerchief stilled, burned. Why would anyone burn a letter unless—" Her voice trailed off, and she glanced at her husband, who shot her a warning look. "Unless they wished to conceal something." Poirot finished for her. "Precise men, and so, we must ask, what was in this letter that was so dangerous it had to be destroyed?" Hastings, eager to contribute, stepped forward. "Poirot, do you think it was a will? Lord Ashford was wealthy, after all. Maybe someone didn't like what it said." Poirot tilted his head, considering. "A will, Hastings. It is a possibility, yes, but I think, perhaps, it is something more sinister. A will is a document of the future. This letter, it speaks of the past. And the past, it has a way of reaching into the present, does it not?" Clara, who had been silent, spoke up, her voice soft but steady. "Uncle Reginald never mentioned any letter to me, but he was secretive lately. He'd lock himself in the library for hours, writing, reading. I thought it was just his accounts, Mademoiselle Clara." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Or perhaps something more personal. You were close to your Uncle Nan. Did he ever speak of a family secret, something that weighed upon him?" Clara hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "No, he didn't. But he was different these past few weeks. Distracted, he'd stare out at the quarry sometimes, as if he was looking for something." "The quarry," Poirot repeated, filing the detail away. "Interesting. And you, Monsieur Grayson? As the butler, you see much, hear much. Did you ever see this letter, or perhaps Lord Ashford with it?" Grayson's face remained impassive, though his fingers tightened briefly on the edge of the doorframe. "I'm afraid not, sir. My duties keep me busy, but I don't pry into his lordship's private matters." "Of course," Poirot said smoothly. "And you, Dr. Mortimer, a man of learning, an archaeologist, you study the past, do you not? Did Lord Ashford ever share with you any relics of his own family's history?" Dr. Mortimer's fingers stopped drumming. "Lord Ashford was a patron of my work, nothing more. We discussed artifacts, history, but nothing about letters or secrets. I'm here to study the estate's potential archaeological sites, not to meddle in family affairs. Poirot smiled faintly. Yet, the past, it is your domain. And this letter, it is a piece of the past, Nan, burned but not forgotten. The room fell silent again, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them. He rose, his movements deliberate, and gestured to Hastings. Come, mon ami, we shall examine the library once more. The letter, it is the key, and we must find what it unlocks. The library was, as they had left it, save for the absence of Lord Ashford's body, which had been discreetly removed by the local coroner. The antique dagger lay on a table, sealed in a cloth for evidence. The fireplace, where the burned letter had been found, was cold now, its ashes carefully preserved by Poirot's earlier instruction. He knelt before it, his gloved hands sifting through the debris with the precision of a surgeon. Hastings, he said, holding up a charred fragment. The paper was brittle, but a few words were legible. Must be paid, family, secret. Another fragment bore a partial signature, too damaged to read. This letter, it was not, meant to survive, but even in its ruin it speaks. Hastings frowned, peering over Poirot's shoulder. It's not much to go on, is it? Could be a debt, like you said, or blackmail, someone threatening to expose something. Blackmail, Poirot mused. Yes, it is possible, but who is the blackmailer and who is the victim? Lord Ashford, perhaps, was being pressed to pay for silence, or perhaps he was the one demanding payment. We must know more. He stood, brushing ash from his gloves, and surveyed the room. The library was grand, its walls lined with leather-bound books, its windows tall and narrow. The locked door, which had so puzzled the household, was a heavy oak affair, its key still in the lock. Poirot's eyes lingered on the window frame, where he had noticed a slight irregularity the previous night, faint scratch, as if something had been forced. Hastings, he said suddenly, fetch me a ladder. I wish to examine this window more closely. Hastings, accustomed to Poirot's abrupt requests, hurried off, returning minutes later with a step-ladder from the servants' quarters. Poirot climbed it with surprising agility for a man of his fastidious nature, his fingers probing the window frame. After a moment, he let out a small exclamation. Aha, regardus, Hastings. A clever trick. He pointed to a thin wire, barely visible, tucked into the frame. This window, it appears locked, but with a pull of this wire, it could be opened from the outside. Not so locked, after all. Hastings' eyes widened. So someone could have come in, killed Ashford, and left, making it look like a locked room. Precisement, Poirot said. But who, and why, burned the letter? We must find the groundskeeper. He spoke of a stranger near the manor last night. Perhaps this stranger is our key. The groundskeeper, a grizzled man named Tompkins, was found tending the rose garden, his hands caked with earth. He straightened as Poirot and Hastings approached, his weathered face wary. Mr. Tompkins, Poirot began, you reported seeing a stranger near the manor last night. Tell me everything, s'il vous plaît. Tompkins scratched his head, his eyes narrowing. Aye, sir. 'Twas about midnight, maybe a bit later. I was checking the gates, like I do, when I saw a figure moving in the shadows, near the west. Wing, tall, cloaked-like. Couldn't see a face. They were heading toward the quarry path. The quarry, Poirot said, his tone thoughtful. And you did not follow? No, sir. Didn't think it wise. Alone in the dark. Figured it was some poacher or vagrant. But with his lordship's death, he trailed off, shaking his head. "Thank you, Mr. Tompkins," Poirot said. "You have been most helpful." As they walked back to the manor, Hastings glanced at Poirot. A cloaked figure. "Sounds like something out of a novel. Do you think it's connected?" "Everything is connected, Hastings," Poirot replied. "The letter, the stranger, the quarry, the red clay smudge in the library. They are pieces of a puzzle, and we must fit them together." Back in the manor, Poirot requested a private audience with each suspect, beginning with Charles. The young man entered the study with a scowl, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Monsieur Charles," Poirot said, gesturing to a chair, "let us speak plainly. Your father is dead, and a letter mentioning a family secret has been destroyed. What do you know of this?" Charles' scowl deepened. "I told you, I don't know anything about a letter. Father and we weren't close. He was always going on about the estate, the family legacy. If there was a secret, he didn't share it with me." "And your debts?" Poirot asked, his tone mild but piercing. "It is known that you owe a considerable sum to certain unsavory individuals in London. Did your father refuse to help you?" Charles flushed. "That's none of your business." "Yes, I've had some bad luck at the tables, but I didn't kill him for it. I was in my room all night, alone." Poirot pressed. "Yes," Charles snapped. "Ask Evelyn, she'll tell you." Poirot nodded, dismissing him. Next came Evelyn, her face pale and her eyes darting nervously. She sat, clutching her handkerchief, as if it were a lifeline, Salzo lifeline. "Madame Ashford," Poirot said gently, "you claimed to be sleepwalking last night, yet no one saw you in the corridors. Where were you, truly?" Evelyn's lips trembled. I don't know. I take medication for my nerves, and sometimes I wander without remembering. I swear I was in my room when I woke up." Poirot studied her, his eyes narrowing. "And this medication, it is strong, Nan. Strong enough to obscure the memory." She nodded, tears welling. "Yes, it's been difficult since my marriage. The pressure, the expectations. I just want to rest." Poirot's expression softened, but his mind was racing. Medication could be tampered with, he thought. A convenient alibi, perhaps too convenient. Clara was next, her demeanor quiet but resolute. "I was reading in my room," she said firmly. "I heard nothing, saw nothing. Uncle Reginald's death. It's awful, but I don't know anything about a letter." "You are certain?" Poirot asked. "Your uncle was troubled, you said. Perhaps he confided in you about this secret." Clara shook her head. "He didn't. He treated me like a child, always keeping things from me. If there was a secret, he kept it to himself." Mr. Grayson followed, his posture rigid. "I was in the servants' quarters, sir," he said. "I heard a scream, but by the time I reached the library, it was too late." "And the letter?" Poirot asked. "Did you ever see Lord Ashford with it?" "No, sir," Grayson replied. "I managed the household, not his lordship's private correspondence." Finally, Dr. Mortimer entered, his scholarly air tinged with irritation. "This is absurd," he said. "I'm a guest, not a suspect. I was in my room, cataloguing artifacts." "And the quarry?" Poirot asked. "You have been seen there, have you not?" Mortimer hesitated. "Yes, I've explored it. The estate has historical significance. I was looking for signs of ancient activity, that's all." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing every word, every gesture. The interviews were over, but the puzzle was far from solved. That afternoon, Poirot Poirot and Hastings ventured to the quarry, a rugged expanse of stone and earth. On the edge of the estate, the air was damp, the ground uneven. Poirot's polished shoes were woefully out of place, but he pressed on, his eyes scanning the terrain. There, he said, pointing to a patch of disturbed earth, footprints, fresh, and look red clay, just like the smudge in the library. Hastings crouched, examining the prints. They're deep. Someone heavy, maybe, or carrying something, or digging, Poirot suggested. Dr. Mortimer spoke of artifacts. Perhaps he was searching for something more valuable. They followed the footprints to a shallow pit, recently dug. Inside were shards of pottery, but nothing of obvious worth. Poirot frowned. This is no treasure, but the clay, it is the same. Someone was here, and they brought it back to the library. Hastings stood, brushing dirt from his hands. So the stranger Tompkins saws it one of them. Charles may be looking for money, or Mortimer after his artifacts. Or someone else, Poirot said. The letter, the clay, the locked room, they are threads, Hastings. We must weave them together. Back at the manor, Poirot requested the burned letter fragments be brought to him. He spread them on a table, piecing together what little remained. The words family secret and debt stood out, but the signature was illegible. He traced the edges, his mind working. Hastings, he said, consider this. The letter was burned, but not entirely. Why? To mislead us, perhaps. To make us think it was destroyed, when in fact the true secret lies elsewhere. Hastings blinked. You mean it's a decoy? Perhaps, Poirot said, or perhaps the burning was interrupted. The scream, it was heard by many. The killer may have been startled. He turned to the household, gathered once more in the drawing room. Mies Amos, he announced. The letter is a clue, but it is not the answer. It points to a secret, yes, but the secret is not on paper. It is here. Among you, someone in this room knows more than they admit. The accusation hung in the air, and the room erupted into protests. Charles stood, red-faced. This is outrageous. You're accusing us all. Not all, Poirot said calmly. Only one. But to find them, we must dig deeper into the past, into the quarry, into the truth. The day wore on, and Poirot's inquiries grew more pointed. He questioned the servants, learning that Lord Ashford had been seen arguing with Grayson weeks earlier, though no one knew why. He spoke to the cook, who mentioned Evelyn's medication had been reordered recently, delivered by an unfamiliar supplier. He interviewed Tompkins again, who described the cloaked figure as moving with purpose, not haste. Each detail was a thread, and Poirot's mind wove them tirelessly. The letter, he suspected, was a lure away to distract from the real motive. But what was it? Revenge? Greed? A long-buried grudge? As night fell, Poirot stood alone in the library, staring at the fireplace. The ashes were gone, but the memory of the letter lingered. He closed his eyes, his little grey cells humming. The red clay, the stranger, the locked room, the secret they were connected, and he was close, very close. Hastings, he called softly, knowing his friend was nearby. Tomorrow we shall visit the quarry again. The answer lies there, I am certain, and when we find it, the letter will speak at last. The night was still, but Blackwood Manor was anything but calm. The truth was near, and Poirot would not rest until it was revealed. Chapter 6. The red clay klooth, morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackwood Manor, casting long, slanting rays across the polished oak floors. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp eyes fixed on a small, innocuous smudge of red clay that had been transferred from the library floor to a scrap of paper, now resting on the table before him. The smudge was no larger than a shilling, yet it held his attention as if it were a beacon in the fog of this perplexing case. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful companion, hovered nearby, his brow furrowed as he watched Poirot's meticulous examination. "It's just dirt, isn't it, Poirot?" Hastings ventured, leaning closer to inspect the smudge. "Surely it's not significant. Could have been tracked in by anyone." Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his amusement. "Mon ami, you see dirt, but I see a story. This red clay, it is not common to the grounds of Blackwood Manor. It speaks of a place specific, a place we must find. And when we find it, Hastings, we shall be one step closer to the truth." Hastings blinked, unconvinced. But the murder happened. In the library, locked room, dagger, all that. What's clay got to do with it? Poirot raised a finger, his expression one of patient instruction. "The little details, Hastings, they are the threads that weave the tapestry of truth. This clay, it is out of place. It is a clue, and Poirot does not ignore clues. Come, we shall investigate." With a purposeful stride, Poirot led Hastings out of the manor, through the grand entrance hall with its towering portraits of stern-faced Ashfords, and into the crisp morning air. The estate sprawled before them, its manicured lawns and rose gardens giving way to wilder terrain beyond the immediate grounds. Poirot's eyes scanned the horizon, settling on a distant ridge where the land dipped into a shadowy hollow. "The quarry," Poirot said, almost to himself. "It is there, I think, that we shall find the source of our red clay." "The quarry," Hastings echoed, adjusting his hat against the morning breeze. "That old place, it had been abandoned for years, hasn't it?" "Precisement," Poirot replied, his voice tinged with excitement. "And yet, someone has been there recently. The clay, it is fresh, not weathered. We shall see what secrets it hides." The two men set off across the estate, their boots crunching on the gravel path that wound through the gardens. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming roses. But Poirot's mind was far from the beauty of the surroundings. His thoughts were consumed by the puzzle of Lord Ashford's murderer, locked room, a missing letter, and now this curious smudge of red clay. Each piece was a fragment of a larger picture, and Poirot was determined to assemble it. The quarry lay a mile from the manor, tucked into a fold of the landscape where the earth had been carved away decades ago to supply stone for the estate's construction. As they approached, the ground grew uneven, the grass giving way to patches of bare soil and scattered rocks. The quarry itself was a vast, open wound in the earth, its steep walls streaked with layers of sediment. At the bottom, a shallow pool of water glinted in the sunlight, surrounded by clumps of red clay that matched the smudge from the library. Poirot paused at the edge, his keen eyes sweeping the scene. "Regard us, Hastings," he said, pointing to a series of impressions in the soft clay near the water's edge. Footprints, fresh and not yet disturbed by wind or rain. Hastings squinted, following Poirot's gaze. The prints were clear, a series of overlapping tracks leading from the water's edge to a narrow path that wound up the quarry's side. "Someone's been here recently," he admitted, "but who and why?" "That mon ami is what we must discover," Poirot said, descending carefully into the quarry. His polished shoes sank slightly into the clay, but he moved with the grace of a man accustomed to navigating obstacles. both physical and intellectual. Hastings followed, less gracefully, muttering about the state of his trousers at the bottom. Poirot knelt beside the footprints, studying their size and shape. A man's boot, I think, he mused. Large, but not unusually so. The tread is deep, suggesting weight or perhaps haste. And here he pointed to a faint smear of clay on a nearby rock. This is deliberate, as if someone paused to wipe their boots. Hastings frowned. You think the killer came here after the murder, to hide something? Perhaps, Poirot said, rising and brushing his hands together. Or perhaps they came here before. The clay was on the floor of the library, yes. It was brought there by someone who had been here. We must ask ourselves, who in the household has reason to visit this place? Hastings scratched his chin. Well, there's Dr. Mortimer. He's an archaeologist, always poking around old sites. Could he have been digging here? Poirot's eyes gleamed. An excellent thought, Hastings. Dr. Mortimer, with his passion for artifacts, is a likely candidate. But we must not assume. Let us explore further. They followed the path upward, the footprints growing fainter as the ground hardened. The trail led to a small overhang, where a pile of loose stones suggested recent disturbance. Poirot crouched again, his fingers tracing the edges of a displaced rock. Beneath it, he found a small, rusted trowel, its handle worn but serviceable. A tool, Poirot said, holding it up for Hastings to see. Left here, perhaps in haste, or perhaps deliberately, to be retrieved later. Hastings took the trowel, turning it over in his hands. Looks like something an archaeologist might use. You think Mortimer was digging here? It is possible, Poirot said, his tone cautious. But we must confirm. Let us return to the manor and speak with the good doctor. The walk back was brisk, Poirot's mind clearly racing as he pieced together the implications of their discovery. The quarry, the clay, the footprints. The trowel were threads in the web of this mystery, and Poirot was determined to follow them to their source. Back at Blackwood Manor, they found Dr. Mortimer in the conservatory, hunched over a table strewn with maps and sketches of ancient artifacts. His wiry frame was tense, his eyes darting nervously as Poirot and Hastings entered. Dr. Mortimer, Poirot began, his voice smooth but firm. I trust we are not interrupting your studies. The archaeologist looked up, his fingers tightening around a pencil. Not at all, Mr. Poirot, just reviewing some notes. What can I do for you? Poirot smiled, a disarming gesture that belied the sharpness of his intent. It is a small matter, monsieur. I am curious about your recent activities. Have you, perhaps, visited the old quarry on the estate? Dr. Mortimer's face paled slightly, though he quickly recovered. The quarry, why, yes, I've been there. Part of my research. The geological features are quite fascinating, you know. Layers of history in the stone. Indeed, Poirot said, his eyes never leaving Mortimer's. And the red clay. Did you find it equally fascinating? Mortimer hesitated, his gaze flickering to the window. Clay, oh yes, there's plenty of it down there. I suppose I might have tracked some back. Clumsy of me. Poirot nodded, as if satisfied, but his mind was far from at ease. And what, pray tell, were you seeking in the quarry? An artifact. Perhaps, Mortimer laughed, a brittle sound. An artifact. In that old pit. No, just studying the stratigraphy. Nothing more. Hastings, sensing an opportunity, jumped in. But you're an archaeologist, aren't you? Always hunting for treasure. Could be something valuable hidden out there, couldn't it? Mortimer's smile faded. I assure you, Captain Hastings, my interests are purely academic. I'm not some treasure hunter. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the exchange. Mercy, Dr. Mortimer, your candor is appreciated. We shall trouble you no further for now. As they left the conservatory, Hastings whispered, He's hiding something, Poirot. Did you see how nervous he was? Oui, Hastings, Poirot replied, his voice low. Dr. Mortimer is indeed hiding something. But whether it is murder, or merely a secret of his own, we shall see. The rest of the day was spent in quiet observation. Poirot interviewed the groundskeeper, a grizzled man named Jenkins, who confirmed seeing a figure in the quarry 2 nights before, too dark to identify, but tall and moving quickly. Jenkins also mentioned that the quarry had long been rumoured to hold a hidden treasure, a tale passed down from the days of Lord Ashford's grandfather. Poirot listened intently, filing away every detail. That evening, as the household gathered for dinner, the tension was palpable. Charles Ashford, Lord Ashford's son, sat at the head of the table, his jaw tight as he avoided his wife Evelyn's gaze. Clara, the orphaned niece, picked at her food, her eyes darting nervously to the others. Mr. Grayson, the butler, moved with his usual efficiency, but Poirot noticed a slight tremor in his hands as he poured the wine. Dr. Mortimer, meanwhile, was subdued, his earlier bravado replaced by a quiet unease. Poirot, seated at the far end of the table, observed them all with his characteristic calm. He ate sparingly, his attention focused on the interplay of glances and silences. When the conversation turned to the quarry, prompted by Hastings' unsubtle prompting, Dr. Mortimer stiffened. I hear the quarry's quite a spot, Hastings said, cutting into his roast. All that red clay must be a gold mine for an archaeologist, eh, Dr. Mortimer? Mortimer forced a smile. As I told Mr. Poirot, it's of geological interest, nothing more. Clara looked up, her voice soft but sharp. Didn't grandfather once say there was something hidden there? Some old family legend? Charles snorted. Nonsense. Just stories to keep the servants entertained. There's nothing in that quarry but rocks and mud. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, mademoiselle, legends often have a kernel of truth. Perhaps there is something in the quarry worth seeking, something worth killing for. The table fell silent, the clink of cutlery replaced by an uneasy stillness. Evelyn's fork slipped from her hand, clattering against her plate. Mr. Grayson paused mid-step, his face unreadable. Dr. Mortimer's hand tightened around his glass. Poirot continued, his voice gentle but probing. The red clay, it was found in the library where Lord Ashford met his end. It is curious, is it not, that such a specific clue should appear in a locked room? One wonders who brought it there and why. No one answered, but the weight of Poirot's words hung over the table like a storm cloud. The meal concluded in near silence, each guest retreating to their thoughts and their secrets. Later that night, Poirot and Hastings sat in the library, the scene of the crime. The room was as it had been, save for the absence of Lord Ashford's body. The antique dagger, now in police custody, had been replaced by a chalk outline on the rug. The fireplace, where the burned letter had been found, was cold, its ashes swept clean. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. The red clay, Hastings, he said. It is the key. It tells us that someone was in the quarry, and then in this room. But why? What did they seek? And how does it connect to the murder? Hastings leaned against the desk, his arms crossed. You think it's Mortimer, don't you? He's the only one with a reason to be digging around out there. Poirot tilted. His head, Dr. Mortimer, is a man of secrets, yes. But we must not leap to conclusions. The quarry may hold answers, but it may also be a distraction. We must consider all possibilities. Hastings sighed. It's a devil of a puzzle, Poirot. A locked room, a missing letter, red clay, and now a quarry. Where do we go from here? Poirot smiled, his eyes bright with determination. We go deeper, mon ami. We follow the clay, the footprints, the secrets, and we trust in the little grey cells to guide us. Over the next few days, Poirot's investigation intensified. He returned to the quarry, accompanied by Jenkins, who pointed out a hidden crevice in the rock face, barely visible unless one knew where to look. Inside, Poirot found traces of more red clay, along with a scrap of fabric caught on a jagged stone. The fabric was fine, dark, and bore a faint monogram to warn to read clearly, but enough to suggest it belonged to someone in the household. Back at the manor, Poirot questioned the staff, focusing on their movements the night of the murder. The housemaid, a timid girl named Mary, admitted to seeing Dr. Mortimer leave the manor late that evening, carrying a small bag. She hadn't thought much of it, assuming he was off on one of his digs. Poirot thanked her, his mind racing with possibilities. He also spoke with Evelyn, whose sleepwalking alibi was beginning to fray. Under gentle but relentless questioning, she admitted to taking a sedative each night, prescribed by a London doctor. Poirot asked to see the bottle, noting that the label was slightly askew, as if it had been tampered with. A quick consultation with the local chemist confirmed his suspicions. The sedative had been diluted, rendering it ineffective. Someone wanted Evelyn awake that night, perhaps to cast suspicion on her Charles. Meanwhile, was evasive when asked about his debts. Poirot learned from a discreet inquiry with the estate solicitor that Charles had borrowed heavily against his expected inheritance, a fact he'd kept from his father. The revelation added another layer to the tangled web of motives. Clara, the niece, was more forthcoming, though her nervous demeanor suggested she was holding back. She spoke of her uncle's controlling nature, how he'd dictated her every move since she came to live at Blackwood Manor. He said it was for my own good, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears, but it felt like a cage. Poirot listened, his expression sympathetic but his mind alert. Clara's resentment was clear, but was it enough to drive her to murder? And what of Mr. Grayson, the butler, whose impeccable service hid a past Poirot had yet to uncover? As the days passed, Poirot's focus returned to Dr. Mortimer. The archaeologist's obsession with the quarry was undeniable, and his nervous behavior suggested he knew more than he was saying. Poirot arranged a private meeting in the conservatory, where he laid out his findings: the footprints, the trowel, the fabric, the clay. Dr. Mortimer, Poirot said, his voice calm but unyielding, you have been to the quarry, yes. You have searched for something there. It is time to tell Poirot the truth. Mortimer's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. All right, he said at last. I was in the quarry. I've been studying the estate's history, and theirs. A legend, an artifact, a relic from the Ashford family's past. I thought it might be buried there, but I swear I had nothing to do with Lord Ashford's death. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And this artifact, what is it? Mortimer hesitated, then sighed. a ceremonial dagger, supposedly from an ancient burial site. It's said to be priceless, I thought. If I could find it, it would secure my reputation. Poirot nodded slowly. And the red clay, it came from your boots, did it not? Mortimer nodded, shamefaced. Yes, I was careless. But I wasn't in the library that night. I was in the quarry, digging. Poirot did not respond immediately. He studied Mortimer, weighing his words against the evidence. The archaeologist's story was plausible, but it did not explain everything. The clay in the library, the locked room, the burned letter, these were pieces of a puzzle that did not yet fit. As Poirot and Hastings left the conservatory, the detective's mind was alight with possibilities. The red clay clue had led them to the quarry, to Dr. Mortimer, and to the legend of a hidden artifact. But was the artifact real, or was it a distraction, a lure to draw attention away from the true motive? And who among the households, Evelyn, Clara, Grayson, or Mortimer, had the cunning to stage such a crime? The answers, Poirot knew, lay in the details. The footprints, the trowel, the fabric, the clayall were signposts on the path to truth, and Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, would follow that path to its end, no matter how tangled or treacherous it proved to be. Chapter 7. A tangled web of motives. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackwood Manor, casting long shadows across the oak-panelled dining room. Hercule Poirot sat at the head of the table, his posture impeccable, his moustache meticulously groomed. His sharp eyes scanned the faces of the household, each person seated in uneasy silence, their breakfast plates barely touched. The air was thick with suspicion, and the weight of Lord Ashford's murder hung over them like a storm cloud that refused to break. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, sat to Poirot's right, his brow furrowed as he scribbled notes in a small leather-bound journal. The others, Charles Ashford, Evelyn Ashford, Clara, Mr. Grayson, and Dr. Mortimer, shifted uncomfortably under Poirot's gaze. The discovery of the maid, Emily, found strangled in the servants' corridor just before dawn, had shattered any pretense of normalcy. 2 murders in as many days had turned Blackwood Manor into a house of secrets, and Poirot was determined to unravel them. Mies Amos, Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding. We are now faced with not one, but 2 tragedies. The death of Lord Ashford was a crime of calculation, but the murder of the young maid, Emily, suggests a desperation, a fear of discovery. I, Hercule Poirot, will not rest until the truth is laid bare. Each of you has a story, a motive, a secret. It is time to examine these threads and see how they weave together. Charles Ashford, his face flushed with either anger or guilt, leaned forward. This is absurd, Mr. Poirot. You're treating us like criminals when there's clearly an outsider at work. A vagrant, perhaps, or someone from the village with a grudge. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Nan, Monsieur Charles, the evidence, it does not support such a convenient theory. The red clay found in the library, the burned letter, the locked room, these are not the work of a passing stranger. They are the work of someone intimate with this house, its secrets, and its weaknesses. Evelyn, her delicate hands twisting. A napkin glanced nervously at her husband. But why Emily? She was just a maid. She had no enemies. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Mademoiselle Emily, she was not killed for who she was, but for what she knew. She overheard something, perhaps, or saw something she should not have. Her death, it is a warning to us. All the killer is still among us. Clara, the orphaned niece, sat pale and silent at the far end of the table. Her eyes, red from crying, darted toward Mr. Grayson, the butler, who stood rigidly by the door, his face an unreadable mask. Dr. Mortimer, the archaeologist, fidgeted with his spectacles, his fingers trembling slightly as he avoided Poirot's gaze. "Let us begin," Poirot said, "with the motives, for it is in the heart of human desire, greed, revenge, fear that we find the roots of murder." The debt of Charles Ashford Poirot turned his attention to Charles, whose jaw tightened at the scrutiny. "Monsieur Charles, it has come to my attention that you are in considerable financial distress. Your father, Lord Ashford, was a wealthy man, yet he controlled the purse strings tightly, did he not? You have debts, gaming debts, I believe, and investments that have soured. The death of your father, it would free up the estate, Nan." Charles slammed his fist on the table, rattling. "The china? That's preposterous. Yes, I've had some bad luck, but I'd never kill my own father. I was in my room that night, as I told you. I heard nothing, saw nothing." And yet Poirot continued, undeterred. "The groundskeeper, Mr. Thompson, reports seeing a man, matching your description near the library wing shortly before the scream was heard. You claim to have been asleep, but the manor is large, and the corridors are quiet. It would be a simple matter to slip out unnoticed." Hastings leaned forward, his pencil pausing. "Good Lord, Poirot, are you saying Charles staged the locked room?" Poirot's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Patience, mon ami. I say only that Monsieur Charles has a motive, and his alibi, it is not so strong as he would like us to believe." Charles's face reddened further, but he said nothing, his eyes darting to Evelyn, who looked away. Evelyn's fear of ruin. Poirot's gaze shifted to Evelyn, whose composure was beginning to crack. "Madame Ashford, you have presented yourself as the devoted wife, but there is fear in your eyes. The status of being Lady Ashford, it is important to you, is it not? The wealth, the prestige, it is a fragile thing, dependent on the survival of this estate. If Lord Ashford were to disinherit Charles, or if the estate were to pass to another, your position would be precarious." Evelyn's lips parted, but no sound came out. She clutched the napkin tighter, her knuckles white. "I don't know what you mean," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was sleepwalking that night. I've done it since I was a child." "I couldn't have sleepwalking," Poirot interrupted, his tone sharp. "A convenient excuse, perhaps. But tell me, madame, how is it that your sleepwalking led you to the east wing, near the library, on the very night of the murder? And why is it that your medication, which you claim prevents these episodes, was found in the servants' quarters, tampered with?" A gasp escaped Clara, and all eyes turned to Evelyn. She shook her head frantically. "I don't know, I swear. I don't know how it got there. Someone must have taken it." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Someone, but who and why? "The tampering of your medication suggests a deliberate act, madame. Perhaps to ensure you were seen wandering, to cast suspicion upon you. Or perhaps to provide you with an alibi for something more sinister." Hastings scribbled furiously, muttering, "This is getting complicated, Poirot." "Nan, mon ami," Poirot replied, "it is becoming clear. The threads, they begin to form a pattern." Clara's resentment. Poirot turned to Clara, whose delicate frame seemed to shrink under his scrutiny. "Mademoiselle Clara, you are the orphaned niece, dependent on Lord Ashford's generosity. But generosity, it can feel like a chain. Nan, you are young, intelligent, Yet you are kept under his control, your future dictated by his will. Did you resent him for this?" Eyes flashed with defiance. "He was good to me," she said, her voice trembling. "He took me in when I had no one. But yes, he could be controlling. He didn't trust me to make my own decisions. He thought I was too young, too naive." "And the letter," Poirot pressed, "the burned letter we found in the library. It spoke of a family secret and a debt to be paid. You were seen in the library earlier that day, mademoiselle. Did you know of this letter? Did it concern you?" Clara's hands clenched into fists. "I don't know anything about a letter. I was reading in my room that night, as I told you. I didn't even know Uncle Reginald was dead until the morning." Poirot tilted his head, studying her. "And yet, mademoiselle, your room is directly above the library. A scream, it would carry through the floorboards. Nan, you heard nothing." Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to the side. I might have heard something, but I thought it was a dream. I was half asleep." Poirot's smile was thin. "A dream or a memory you prefer not to share? We shall see." Mr. Grayson's hidden past the butler. Mr. Grayson stood like a statue by the door, his hands clasped behind his back. Poirot's gaze lingered on him, and the room seemed to grow colder. "Monsieur Grayson, you are the loyal servant, the man who knows every corner of this manor. You have served Lord Ashford for many years, yet there is something in your manner that suggests a history, a scandal, perhaps, that you have worked hard to bury." Grayson's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "I have served this family faithfully, Mr. Poirot. I have no secrets that bear on this matter." "And yet," Poirot said, "the villagers speak of a man who once worked here. A man dismissed in disgrace after a theft was discovered. The name Grayson, it was mentioned. You returned to Blackwood Manor years later, under a new guise, perhaps. Or is there another explanation for the whispers that follow you?" Grayson's eyes narrowed, but he did not flinch. "I have nothing to hide, Mr. Poirot. The villagers are prone to gossip. I was in the servants' quarters that night, as I told you. I heard nothing until the scream woke me." Poirot nodded slowly. "We shall see, Monsieur Grayson. The truth, it has a way of rising to the surface, like oil in water. Dr. Mortimer's obsession." Finally Poirot turned to Dr. Mortimer, whose nervous fidgeting had grown more pronounced. "Doctor, you are a man of science, a man obsessed with the past. You came to Blackwood Manor to study its artifacts, but your interest, it is not purely academic, Nan. The groundskeeper saw you at the quarry, near the source of the red clay found in the library. You admitted to exploring there, but you claim it was for research. Tell me, what is it you seek?" Dr. Mortimer adjusted his spectacles, his voice unsteady. "I've told you, Mr. Poirot, I'm studying the geological history of the estate. The quarry is rich in fossils and artifacts. I was there to collect samples, nothing more. And yet," Poirot said, "the map in your room, it is marked, with precise locations within the quarry. A treasure, perhaps. A legend of a priceless artifact buried on these grounds. Lord Ashford, he spoke of such things, did he not? And you, Doctor, you are a man who would risk much to claim such a prize." Dr. Mortimer's face paled. I admit, I've heard the rumours. There's talk of an ancient relic, a ceremonial dagger from a lost civilization, buried somewhere on the estate. But I swear I had nothing to do with Lord Ashford's death. I was in my room that night, studying my notes." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A dagger, you say? like the one used to kill Lord Ashford. A curious coincidence, Nan. The second murder. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. A young footman entered, his face ashen. "Mr. Poirot, sir, there's something you should see." In the servants' corridor, Poirot and Hastings followed the footman, leaving the others. In the dining room, under the watchful eye of a local constable, the corridor was narrow, dimly lit by flickering gas lamps. At the far end, a small crowd of servants had gathered, their whispers hushed as Poirot approached. There, crumpled against the wall, was the body of Emily, the maid. Her eyes were wide with terror, her hands clutching at a thin cord that had been tightened around her neck. Poirot knelt beside her, his expression grave. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "She was young, full of life, and now she is silenced. Why?" Hastings, visibly shaken, pointed to a small scrap of paper clutched in Emily's hand. Poirot carefully pried it free, revealing a single word scrawled in hasty ink: "Quarry." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The quarry again. The red clay, the map, the artifact. It is all connected, Hastings. But how? A web of lies back in the dining room. Poirot resumed his questioning, the weight of the second murder adding urgency to his words. "Emily's death," he said, "was no accident. She was killed because she knew something dangerous. Perhaps she overheard a conversation or saw someone where they should not have been. Let us consider the timeline." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Lord Ashford was killed between midnight and 1 o'clock, based on the state of the body. Emily was killed much later, likely just before dawn. This suggests the killer acted to cover their tracks, to eliminate a witness. But who among you had the opportunity? Charles pointed an accusing finger at Dr. Mortimer. "He's the one obsessed with the quarry. Maybe Emily saw him sneaking around, and he silenced her." Dr. Mortimer shot to his feet. "That's a lie. I was in my room all night. I had no reason to harm that girl." Evelyn's voice was sharp. "What about Clara? She's always skulking about, listening at doors. Maybe she heard something she shouldn't have." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "How dare you? I cared about Emily. She was kind to me. I'd never hurt her." Mr. Grayson remained silent, but Poirot noticed the slight tremor in his hands. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, "you were in the servants' quarters, close to where Emily was found. Did you see or hear anything unusual?" Grayson shook his head. "Nothing, sir. I was asleep until the commotion woke me." Poirot's gaze lingered on him, but he said nothing more. Instead, he turned to the group as a whole. "Each of you has a motive, a reason to wish Lord Ashford dead. But Emily's murder, it narrows the field. The killer is someone who feared exposure, someone who knew she held a dangerous secret. I will find that person." The quarry revisited that afternoon. Poirot and Hastings ventured to the quarry. A jagged scar in the earth, surrounded by overgrown brambles. The red clay was unmistakable, clinging to their boots as they navigated the uneven terrain. Poirot examined the ground, noting fresh footprints that matched those found in the library. "These are recent," he said, crouching to inspect them. "And they are deep, as if someone was carrying something heavy, a tool, perhaps, or something else." Hastings frowned. "You think the artifact is real, Poirot, that someone killed for it?" Poirot straightened, dusting off his hands. "The artifact, mon ami, may be real or it may be a myth. But it is a powerful idea, one that drives men to desperation. Dr. Mortimer believes in it, and someone in this house used that belief to their advantage. As they returned to the manor, Poirot's mind was racing. The red clay, the burned letter, the locked room, the strangled maid, all were pieces of a puzzle, and he was close to seeing the full picture. But one piece was still missing, one truth that would tie it all together. A glimpse of the truth that evening. Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. He stood before them, his presence commanding despite his small stature. "Mies, Amos," he said, "the web of motives is tangled, but it begins to unravel. Lord Ashford's death was not about money alone, nor about an artifact. It was about something deeper, something personal, a betrayal, perhaps, or a secret buried for years. Emily's death was a desperate act to protect that secret." He paused, his eyes scanning their faces. "Tomorrow I will reveal the truth, but tonight I ask you to reflect. The killer is among you, and they know that Hercule Poirot is close. Sleep well, if you can." As the household dispersed, Hastings leaned close to Poirot. "Do you really know who did it, Poirot? Or is this a bluff?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The little grey cells, mon ami, they are never idle. Tomorrow all will be clear." The night passed uneasily, with creaking floorboards and whispered conversations echoing through the manor. Poirot sat in his room, a single candle burning, his mind piecing together the final clues. The red clay, the letter, the locked room, the quarry, the maid's last word, it all pointed to one inescapable truth. But for now, he would let the killer sweat. The trap was set, and the little grey cells were ready to triumph. Chapter 8. The Locked Room Puzzle. Hercule Poirot stood in the library of Blackwood Manor, his keen eyes scanning every detail of the room where Lord Reginald Ashford had met his untimely end. The heavy oak door, locked from the inside, had been forced open by the butler, Mr. Grayson, after the scream had echoed through the manor. The antique dagger, still embedded in Lord Ashford's chest, gleamed faintly in the morning light filtering through the tall, leaded windows. The smudge of red clay on the polished floorboards remained undisturbed, a silent clue that seemed to taunt Poirot's meticulous mind. Captain Hastings stood by his side, his face a mixture of awe and frustration as he watched Poirot pace the room with measured steps. "It's impossible, Poirot," Hastings said, shaking his head. The door was locked, the windows bolted. From within, no one could have entered or left without being seen. It's as if the murderer vanished into thin air. Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, a sign that his little grey cells were hard at work. "Impossible, mon ami. Non. There is no such thing as an impossible crime only, a crime that has not yet been understood. The solution lies here, in this very room, if we but look closely enough." He knelt beside the body, examining the dagger once more. Its ornate handle, inlaid with silver filigree, suggested it was more than a mere weapon. It was a piece of the manor's history. Poirot's gloved fingers traced the edge of the wound, noting the angle and depth. "The blow was precise," he murmured, "delivered with force, yet with control. This was no act of impulse." Hastings frowned. But how did the killer get out? The key was in Lord Ashford's pocket, and Grayson swears the door was locked when he broke it down. Poirot rose, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the room. The library was a grand space, its walls lined with towering bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and empty save for the charred fragments of the burned letter Poirot had discovered. Earlier, a heavy mahogany desk stood near the center, cluttered with papers, an inkwell, and a brass candelabrum. The windows, framed by thick velvet curtains, were indeed bolted shut, their latches rusted from disuse. Yet something about the scene felt staged. "Tell me, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice soft but commanding, "what do you see when you look at this room?" Hastings shrugged, gesturing helplessly. "A library, books, furniture, a dead body. What am I supposed to see?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "You see, but you do not observe. The room, it tells a story. The question is, whose story is it? The murderer's or the victim's?" He crossed to the windows, running his fingers along the frame of the nearest one. The bolts were old, their surfaces pitted with age, but they held firm. Yet as Poirot pressed against the wooden frame, he felt a slight give, a subtle movement that should not have been possible in a structure so solid. His eyes gleamed with sudden interest. "Hastings, venez ici," he called, beckoning his friend. "Feel this. The frame, it is not as secure as it appears." Hastings pressed against the wood, his brow furrowing. "It's loose, all right, but the bolts are still in place. Could someone have tampered with it?" "Precisement," Poirot said, his voice tinged with excitement. "This window, it is the key to our locked room. The bolts, they are for show, but the frame itself, it has been altered. Observe the scratches here, near the latch. They are fresh, made recently. Someone has manipulated this window to create the illusion of a sealed room." Hastings's eyes widened. "You mean the killer got in and out through the window, then made it look like it was locked?" Poirot nodded. "It is a clever trick, but not infallible. The mechanism, it requires knowledge of the manor's construction. Only someone familiar with its secrets could have devised such a plan." "But who?" Hastings asked, glancing toward the door as if expecting the culprit to walk in. "Charles, Evelyn, Clara. They've all lived here long enough to know the house inside out. Even Grayson, the butler, has been here for decades." Poirot held up a hand, silencing his friend. "Patience, Hastings. The window is but one piece of the puzzle. We must consider the other clues, the red clay, the burned letter, the dagger itself. Each tells us something about the murderer's mind." He moved to the fireplace, crouching to examine the ashes once more. The fragments of the burned letter were tantalizingly incomplete, but Poirot had pieced together enough to know it mentioned a family secret and a debt to be paid. The handwriting, though partially destroyed, bore a distinctive flourish that suggested it was written by someone educated, perhaps even someone within the household. Poirot's mind raced, connecting the letter to the red clay smudge and the quarry where he had found fresh footprints. "The clay," he mused aloud, "it is not native to the manor's grounds. It comes from the quarry, as we discovered. But why was it here, in this room? Was it brought in deliberately to mislead us? Or was it an accident, a trace left by a careless killer?" Hastings rubbed his chin. "You think the killer was in the quarry before the murder? Maybe Dr. Mortimer, he admitted to poking around there, didn't he?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Dr. Mortimer, he is an interesting figure. His obsession with artifacts may hold the key, or it may be a distraction. But we must not focus on one suspect to the exclusion of others. The household, it is a nest of vipers, each with their own secrets." He returned to the desk, sifting through the papers scattered across its surface. Most were mundane accounts, letters from tenants, a draft of Lord Ashford's speech for an upcoming charity event. But one item caught Poirot's eye, a small, leather-bound notebook tucked beneath a pile of receipts. He opened it, revealing pages filled with Lord Ashford's cramped handwriting. The entries detailed his concerns about the family's finances, particularly Charles's mounting debts and Evelyn's extravagant spending. One passage stood out. Clara grows restless. She speaks of independence, but I fear her resentment runs deeper. I must protect the estate, but at what cost? The secret must remain buried. Poirot's brow furrowed. The secret, he murmured. Always, it comes back to this secret. But what is it, and why was it worth killing for? Hastings peered over his shoulder. Sounds like Clara's got a motive, doesn't it? If she resented her uncle's control, maybe she snapped. Poirot shook his head. Clara, she is emotional. Yes, but her alibi is weak, not non-existent. And the locked room, it requires planning, precision. We must consider the others, Charles, with his debts. Evelyn, with her fear of losing her status. Grayson, with his long service and hidden past. And Dr. Mortimer, whose motives remain unclear. He closed the notebook, slipping it into his pocket for later study. Come, Hastings, let us walk the grounds. The library has told us much, but the manor itself may have more to say. They stepped out into the crisp morning air, the sprawling lawns of Blackwood Manor stretching before them. The manor itself was a labyrinth of stone and ivy, its towers and gables casting long shadows across the grass. Poirot led the way toward the quarry, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. Hastings followed, his mind still grappling with the locked room puzzle. Poirot, he said, breaking the silence, if the killer used the window, why go to all that trouble? Why not just stab Lord Ashford and leave through the door? Because, mon ami, Poirot replied, the locked room is a statement. It is meant to confuse, to defy explanation. The killer wishes us to believe in the impossible, to doubt our own reasoning. But Hercule Poirot, he does not believe in the impossible. They reached the quarry, its jagged walls rising like the ruins of some ancient fortress. The red clay was unmistakable, clinging to the rocks and staining the ground. Poirot knelt, examining the footprints he had found earlier. They were deep, suggesting someone had lingered here, perhaps carrying something heavy. He traced the outline of one print, noting its size and shape. A man's boot, he said. Large, but not unusually so. It could belong to Charles, Dr. Mortimer, or even Grayson. But the question remains, why were they here? Hastings kicked at a loose stone. Maybe they were looking for that artifact Dr. Mortimer's so obsessed with. You said yourself it might be tied to the murder. Poirot stood, dusting off his hands. Perhaps, but I suspect the artifact is a red herring, a tale spun to distract us from the true motive. The red clay, it was brought into the library deliberately to lead us here. The killer wishes us to chase shadows. They returned to the manor, where the household was gathered in the drawing room, their faces pale and tense. Charles Ashford paced by the fireplace, his hands clenched into fists. Evelyn sat rigidly on a chaise longue, her eyes darting nervously. Clara clutched a book, her knuckles white. Mr. Grayson stood by the door, his expression impassive but his posture stiff. Dr. Mortimer, ever the outsider, scribbled notes in a journal. Seemingly oblivious to the tension, Poirot cleared his throat, drawing their attention. Madame et messieurs, he began, his voice calm but authoritative. The murder of Lord Ashford was no accident, nor was it the work of a phantom. The locked room, it is a trick, a clever illusion designed to mislead. But Hercule Poirot, he sees through such tricks. The window in the library, it was tampered with a mechanism hidden in the frame, allowed the killer to enter and exit, then restore the appearance of a sealed room. A murmur rippled through the group. Charles stopped pacing, his face darkening. "Are you saying one of us did this?" "That's absurd." Evelyn's voice was sharp. "How could anyone know about a secret mechanism? That library hasn't been renovated in years." Clara's eyes widened. "But the manor's old. There could be passages, hidden things we don't know about." Poirot's gaze flicked to Grayson, whose composure faltered for a moment. "Indeed, Mademoiselle Clara, the manor, it holds many secrets, and only someone with intimate knowledge of its workings could have devised such a plan. Tell me, monsieur." "Grayson, how long have you served at Blackwood Manor?" Grayson straightened, his voice steady. 30 years, Monsieur Poirot. I know every inch of this house and its secrets." Poirot pressed, his eyes narrowing. Grayson hesitated, then nodded. "Some, but I assure you, I had no part in this." Poirot smiled faintly. "We shall see, monsieur, we shall see." As the day wore on, Poirot and Hastings continued their investigation, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. Poirot interviewed each suspect again, probing for inconsistencies. Charles's alibied. He was in his room, crumbled, when a maid recalled hearing footsteps in the hall. Evelyn's sleepwalking story seemed less plausible when Poirot discovered her medication bottle was nearly empty, suggesting someone had tampered with it. Clara's claim of reading was supported by a book found open on her bedside table, but the pages were pristine, as if untouched. Dr. Mortimer admitted to exploring the quarry, but insisted he was alone. Grayson remained tight-lipped, his answers polite but evasive. By evening, Poirot had formed a theory, though he kept it to himself. He gathered the household once more, this time in the library, where the scene of the crime loomed large. The dagger had been removed by the coroner, but the bloodstain on the carpet remained, a grim reminder of the violence that had occurred. "Mies, Amos," Poirot said, standing before the fireplace. "The locked room is no longer a mystery. The window, it was the means of escape. But the true question is not how, but why. Why create such an elaborate deception? The answer lies in the motive, and the motive lies in the past." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The red clay, the burned letter, the dagger, they are all distractions, meant to obscure the truth. But the truth, it cannot be hidden from Hercule Poirot. Tomorrow we shall uncover more. For now, I bid you bonne nuit." As the household dispersed, Hastings leaned close. "Poirot, you know something, don't you? Why not tell them?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Because, mon ami, the killer is watching, and I wish to see what they do next." The night passed uneventfully, but Poirot's mind was far from idle. He sat in his room, the notebook open before him, his fingers tracing Lord Ashford's words. The secret, the debt, the resentment, they all pointed to a truth buried deep within the family. The locked room was a puzzle, yes, but it was the human heart that held the key. The next morning, Poirot returned to the library, this time with a small toolkit borrowed from the groundskeeper. He dismantled the window frame, revealing a hidden spring mechanism that allowed the entire panel to slide upward, bolts and all. It was ingenious, requiring only a small lever hidden in the woodwork to operate. Hastings watched, dumbfounded. "Good Lord, Poirot," he said. "It's like something out of a novel. But who could have known about this?" Someone who knows the manor's history, Poirot replied. Someone who has studied its architecture, its quirks. This is not the work of an outsider, Hastings. The killer is one of them. He replaced the panel, ensuring it looked undisturbed, then turned his attention to the dagger. It had been identified as part of the manor's collection, displayed in the library for years, yet its placement in the murder suggested intent, a deliberate choice to use a weapon tied to the estate. Poirot's mind raced, connecting the dagger to the burned letter, the letter to the red clay, and the clay to the quarry. Hastings, he said suddenly, we must return to the quarry. There is something there we have not yet seen. They trekked back to the quarry, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Poirot examined the footprints again, noting a second set he had overlooked before, smaller, shallower, as if made by someone moving quickly. He followed them to a pile of loose rocks, where he found a small, concealed hollow. Inside was a scrap of fabric, torn and stained with red clay. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered. This is no accident. The quarry, it is more than a clue, it is a stage. Hastings blinked. A stage? You mean the killer planned to lead us here? Poirot said. The clay, the footprints, the fabric, they are all part of the performance. But the performance, it is flawed. The killer has overplayed their hand. They returned to the manor, where Poirot requested a private audience with each suspect. He began with Charles, whose temper flared when pressed about his debts. I didn't kill my father, Charles snapped. Yes, I owe money, but I'd never resort to murder. Poirot's eyes were unyielding. And yet, Monsieur Charles, you were seen near the library that night. The maid, she heard footsteps. Can you explain? Charles paled, stammering. I was restless. I walked the halls, but I didn't go into the library. Poirot moved on to Evelyn, who clutched her shawl tightly. My medication, she admitted. It's been off. I haven't been sleeping well, but I swear I didn't kill Reginald. You're sleepwalking, madame, Poirot said. It is. Convenient, Nan. And yet, your bottle of pills, it is nearly empty. Who tampered with it? Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. Someone must have. But it wasn't me. Clara was next, her defiance tempered by fear. I was reading, she insisted. I didn't see anything, I swear. Poirot held up the book from her room. This book, mademoiselle, it is pristine. Not a page turned, not a mark made. You did not read that night. Clara's face crumpled. I was scared. I didn't want to admit I was in the hall, listening. Dr. Mortimer was evasive, his hands fidgeting with his journal. The quarry, he said, it's rich in history. I was studying it, nothing more. And the map in your room, Poirot asked. It marks the quarry, does it not? What were you searching for? Mortimer hesitated. An artifact, but I didn't kill anyone. Finally, Poirot faced Grayson, whose calm facade cracked under scrutiny. You know the manor's secrets, Monsieur Grayson, Poirot said. The window mechanism, it is old, but you knew of it, did you not? Grayson's jaw tightened. I've served this family faithfully. I would never betray them. Poirot smiled thinly. We shall see, monsieur, we shall see, as the day drew to a close. Poirot gathered his thoughts, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The locked room was no longer a mystery. The window mechanism explained the how, but the why remained elusive. The red clay, the burned letter, the dagger, the quarry, they all pointed to a deeper truth, one tied to the manor's past and the secrets it held. That night, Poirot sat by the fire in his room, the notebook open. Before him, Hastings watched, his curiosity barely contained. "Poirot, you've got that look. You know who did it, don't you?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Not yet, mon ami. But the little grey cells, they are close, very close. Tomorrow we shall set a trap, and the killer, they will reveal themselves." He closed the notebook, his mind alight with possibilities. The locked room was a puzzle, yes, but it was the human heart that held the key, and Hercule Poirot was determined to unlock it.